Microsoft Excel is by far the most important and versatile software when it comes to data analysis. In this lengthy and comprehensive lesson, we are going to learn how to use Excel right from scratch all the way up to setting up formulas, all the important Excel functions, analyzing the data using pivot table feature of Excel, and finally concluding with a comprehensive portfolio dashboard like this, using which you can analyze a call center data and visualize the results in a beautiful interactive manner like this. We are also going to learn how to use the Power Query feature of Excel to automate and clean our data easily. Welcome to Excel for Data Analysis video. Let's go. My name is Chandoo and I have been using and teaching Excel for the last 16 years. Let's start our lesson with the basics of Excel. We can use Excel to analyze the data, track information, or update a project or collaborate with others. When you open a blank Excel file, this is what it normally looks like. The screen itself is divided into three main areas. We have got the ribbon up top, and we have got this massive grid area where you have got row numbers 3, 4, 5 like that, and column numbers B, C, D, K, M, etc. The intersection of these things is called a cell. A cell is where you can put any values. You can type some numbers, put some text, or put an image or anything else. And the grid itself is divided into sheets. So right now we have got one sheet, but you can use this plus button to add multiple sheets. So typically when you open Excel, it might add one sheet or it might have 3 sheets. Underneath all of this, we have got a status bar that tells us what is going on at any time, as well as we can use this to zoom in or zoom out of the spreadsheet. As we go through the lesson, you will understand how to access and use various things on the screen. So I'm not going to bore you with details here. Instead, what we will do is we will open a sample data file that I have prepared for you and use that to understand Excel. A quick note here, I have put a set of resources for you, one for each concept that we are covering. So Introduction to Excel, there is one file. Likewise, there is files for formulas, pivots, and the portfolio project and Power Query sections. So feel free to refer to the link in the video description to access all of these files from my website. So here is my Introduction to Excel file. This is an employee data set. We are going to use this same data set later on as well, so that you will understand how this data set helps you explore and understand various things about the data. So here I have got some employee IDs, names, gender, department, salaries. What is the date on which that employee started with us? What is their full-time equivalent or FTE? What kind of employee they are and where they work. The first thing that we will understand is whenever you look at some data like this, you may want to, for example, sort this data or filter it for a specific department or generally explore this data. And this is where the filter functionality of Excel is really handy. All you have to do is when you have data like this, select all of this data. You can use Control-Shift down arrow to select an entire column. Likewise, Control-Shift right arrow to select an entire row. But when you have a grid like this, you can press Control-A, A for all, to select all of this data. You can also press Control-Shift-8 to select all the data. Once the data is selected, in the home ribbon, if you go into Sort and Filter options, you can apply a filter on this data. So once this is selected, I'm going to go here and apply a filter. And now that the filters are applied, for example, I can look at all the employees in our Chennai office. So I can just select that, and when you click OK, all of the employees that are currently working within our Chennai office of India are selected. When you are filtering the data, you can select a single item or you can select multiple items as well. And then all of those employees that satisfy any of those conditions will come in. You can apply the filter on a single column, or you can apply them on multiple columns as well. So for example, I can select multiple locations and then I can say, show me all the female employees within these locations, and we will get a subset of the data like this. When you have number columns like salary or date columns like start date, you can also apply special filters. So for example, I can say salary, and then I can go into number filters, and then I can say greater than, and I can type in a number and see the employees that are making more than that money. So for example, let's take a look at all the people who are making more than 80,000. Now these are the employees. And once you apply the filters, if you clear filter on a specific column, so for example, now that the salary and gender filters are there, I want to see who is these people across the board. So I can go here and use the clear filter from work location. And now what we are seeing is all the employees that are making more than 80,000 and of female gender type. Just as you can filter the data using these filters, you can also sort the data. For that, first I'm going to clear the filters. When you have filters on multiple columns, you will have to go to individual columns and clear the filter, which is a bit tedious. Alternatively, you can also go to Home, Sort and Filter, and then just select Clear, and all the filters will be cleared for you. Everything in Excel comes with a shortcut. So for example, if you want to use a shortcut to clear the filters, you can go here and hover your mouse on the clear button, and then if there is a shortcut available, it will show right there. For example, clear doesn't have a built-in shortcut, but filter does. If you point your mouse on filter, you'll see that Ctrl+Shift+L is the shortcut for filtering the data. But there is a way to access the shortcuts for things that don't have a built-in shortcut. To do that, for example, to clear the filters, first up, I'm going to apply a filter. So let's filter everybody who is in Wellington, New Zealand. And now to clear the filter, as there is no shortcut here, only the button says clear. What we can do is we can press Alt button briefly, and you'll see that there are shortcuts for every ribbon. So for example, Alt H would get us into the home ribbon. So we're going to say Alt H. And once we are in the home ribbon, now we can press S to get into the sort and filter. S, and then you can see that C is for clear. This is a powerful and elegant way to learn Excel as you're using it. Every time you need a shortcut, you just hold the Alt key briefly and then press the keyboard sequence to get to the button that you want. So in this case, we want to clear. So I'm going to press C, and bingo, my data is now fully visible. Like I said, we can also filter the data as well as sort the data with filters. So to sort the employees by their salary, I can select the salary column and then say smallest to largest, and I'll see the employees sorted like this. Here is a quick puzzle for you. What if I want to sort the employees but by gender first and within the gender by salary? Right now the sorting is done in such a way that everybody is sorted, but instead what we want is all the male employees up top, and then within the male their salaries, and then female employees, and within female their salaries. How would you do such two-level sorting? Give it a try. Our next thing that we want to do whenever you're looking at data like this is, you might be wondering if there is any duplicate information in this data. For example, there is duplicate information in this data. You can actually see it right here. Van Tuxwell, the employee has repeated 3 times that name, but if you look at the employee ID itself, there is 2 instances of that ID. This sort of a thing is a problem when I'm trying to analyze the data and I want to identify if there is any employee IDs that are duplicated. To do that, we are going to select the employee ID column, select this entire column, and from home ribbon, use the conditional formatting, highlight duplicate values. When you click OK, all the duplicate employees will be highlighted in this pink color, so you can easily spot them. What if you don't want to spot them? What if you want to filter them? Now that the employees are highlighted, you can use the filter and use the color option to filter all these colored employees. And we can see Van Tuxwell is repeated, Pratigya Rema, and Jamie O'Ferris and Sajjad Probal. Now these people, their names are different, but they're sharing the same employee ID, which is also a problem. It kind of tells me that there is some data quality issues here. Why 2 employees have same ID, but they are having different names? And if you look at their salaries and departments and gender, date of join, FTE, everything is matching, just the name is different. So something wrong here, and again, this kind of a thing is easy to identify using the conditional formatting highlight duplicate values option. I'm going to clear the filters on this, and to take away that color, you can again select this data, go to Home, Conditional Formatting, Clear Rules from selected cells. I'm going to leave these highlighting there, but you can use this option to clear the highlighting from any selected cells or the entire worksheet. Let's say looking at these employees, you want to understand who has this question mark department. Maybe there is some data quality issues and we are not getting the department name for everybody. To filter them, you have two ways of doing this. One way is you can select this and unselect everything and select the question mark. But I'm going to show you a powerful and simple way to do this, which is just right click on the value that you want to filter and go to filter selected cells value. This is going to filter whatever you have currently selected. And here I can see these three people are not flagged into their correct departments. Again, this tells me that there is something fishy going on with this data, and maybe I want to check up with our payroll department to understand what is going on here. Another thing that you may want to do whenever you are analyzing the data like this is, for example, you may want to see all the top 5 salaries or bottom 5 salaries or all the people who have joined recently or something like that. So for example, in the salary column, we have already sorted this. So I'm going to take the sorting to my employee ID. And while looking at like this, I want to see who are our top 10 employees by the salary. So I can use this filter again and go to number filters and use the top 10 option and say I want to see the top 10 items. You can change these things, by the way, and change from top to bottom if you want to see the bottom 10. And once you adjust this and click OK, you will be able to see the employees that are making highest salaries. You can also apply special filters for dates. If you have a start date, you can use the date filters and, for example, see which employees have joined in the last week or last month or last quarter or last year. You can also use the between option to select employees that joined between 2 points in time. Let's conclude this segment of our Excel lesson by building a quick summary of our data. For example, I may want to calculate what is the total salary, what is the total FTE, or what is the total count of employee IDs. To calculate the total of any column, you can select the entire column. Again, the shortcut is Ctrl+Shift down arrow. And once the column is selected, you can use the Home ribbon and Autosum button. In fact, if you place your cursor on it, you'll see the shortcut for this, which is Alt equal to. So once you select the column, if you press Alt equal to, you will get the total added at the bottom. The column is too narrow to show it, and it will give you what is the sum. You can examine this formula. To examine the formula, if you select the cell and press F2 to edit it, you'll see that it has written a sum formula for us. Sum is this much. And you can apply some formatting on it. Let's make it bold and let's fill some color into it. So we can see that our total salary for this set of employees is 4.17 million. Likewise, I can do the same for FTE here. I can select this cell and press Alt equal to. When I select a blank cell, Excel automatically identifies all the cells above it and adds it up for me and then tells me our total FTE is 51. Let's do that for this as well, Alt equal to, and unfortunately as these are text values, Excel hasn't told me what is the count of employees. It is trying to sum, but these are text values, so it's not going to work. We are going to later on cover how to add counts of employees or how to count the number of male employees or how to count the number of employees that are in a specific department, etc. using various powerful Excel functions. As you can see here, doing some quick analysis of Excel is really simple. In the subsequent parts of this video, we are going to see an expanded set of this data and understand how to use Power Query to automatically clean and manipulate this data, and then how to use Excel tables, formulas, and pivot tables to analyze this data. Let's continue our journey. Of all the features that are available in Excel and Power BI, Power Query is the #1 feature for me. Why? Because it lets me save time and get to my data quickly. So in this video, let's understand what Power Query is and how to use it with two practical examples. These are, number one is a web scraping example where we are going to connect to a website and get the data in a dynamic fashion. And the second one is we are going to connect to a local network file and get the data from it. Through these two examples, we are also going to uncover many of the powerful and useful time-saving features of Power Query. Let's go. Oh, by the way, this is part of my free data analysis course series on YouTube. You can see the previous parts as well as the next parts by looking at the playlist that is linked in the video description below, or going to the web page that I have set up for the free data analyst course. Let's go. So what is Power Query? Power Query is a data cleaning and a data transformation software. It comes pre-packaged with both Excel as well as Power BI. And the approach of using this software is exactly similar whether you use it in Excel or Power BI. You can also use Power Query with the online Power BI platform as well as Fabric. So today we are going to look at two examples. One is a web scraping example and the second one is a local network example. So both of these we are going to do through Excel, but you can also apply all of these steps from Power BI as well. For our web scraping example, we are going to look at the 2020 Summer Olympics medal table data. This is a publicly available data set available on the Wikipedia website. If you go on this page, you will see that there is a nice little table that is available here. Let's say for an upcoming data analysis project, I would like to get this data into Excel as a neat table. We can, of course, copy paste this data, but we would like to connect to this website and get this data. That way, if and when this website changes, we can refresh and get the new data. Of course, the Summer Olympics medal table from 2020 is not going to change, but once you know the technique, you can connect to a more live data set and get the up-to-date information. So let's go to the Excel here. I have already got the URL here, but you can also copy the URL from the browser address bar. And we'll go to the data ribbon and you're going to find all the Power Query related options inside the data ribbon here. There is also going to be a query tab that appears once we have set up a successful connection. If you are using any version of Excel from 2016 or onwards, you will find these options here. For a slightly older version like 2013, you may have to enable some features of Excel to see the get and transform data or Power Query options there. So we are going to use these buttons. If you see here, get data, there are many ways in which you can get the data into Excel through Power Query. And some of these options will appear or disappear depending on what type of Excel you have. As we want to get the data from web, we can say get data from other sources from web. Alternatively, there is also a button called from web right here. So we're going to click on that and paste the URL here. Click OK, and you're going to get a navigator screen with all the tables that are available in that web page. You might see some different options depending on which version of Excel you are running, but you should essentially see the text and the HTML tables that are available on the page. And you can kind of select the 2020 Summer Olympics medal table 36. That's the name of the table, and this is the data that we want. You can see all the information here nicely listed. We would like to load this data into Excel, but before we do that, we would also like to do some cleanup steps on this data. For example, Japan has an asterisk next to it because it's the host nation. Likewise, there might be some other options here like null values for all of these countries where they have shared the rank of the medals. So for example, Greece and Uganda have same kinds of medals. So they're both tied for the 36th space. So this is where you can use the transform data button to load this data into Power Query so that we can experience what Power Query is like. So let's hit on that. And this will open the Power Query editor. This is a really powerful and amazing software that we use to clean up, transform, and create new kinds of data based on what we already have. Let me first quickly explain what we see on the screen. The screen has four main areas: We've got this big ribbon area up top. This is where all the buttons of Power Query are listed. The ribbon itself is broken into various kinds of ribbons. We have got home, transform, add, column, view ribbons. And then the main area of Power Query is split into 3 areas. This is 1, 2, 3. The first area lists all the queries that you have. Right now, there is only one query. Think of query as a table for now, but essentially you can also have other kinds of data here. The second area shows whatever query we have selected. So right now we have one query and that is being shown as a preview here in this part of the screen. And the third area tells us what is it that we have done on that data so far. So these are called steps, and think of steps as operations or things that you do on top of the data. Right now we haven't done anything. All we did is we connected to a source. The source is the Wikipedia website, and we extracted the table. So those are the 2 steps that we are seeing right now. But as you make more operations on this data, you will see Power Query records those steps. For each step, there is a bit of associated code written into the data, and you can kind of see the preview of the code here in the formula bar. Now, if you're not seeing this formula bar, that means you've disabled it or it was not enabled at all. You can go to the view ribbon and enable the formula bar there, so that you can start to see that little piece of code. Anyhow, we don't even need to know what this code is in order to use the Power Query. So let's go ahead and actually use this data and define some transformations or cleanup steps on top of this data. So this is where we are connecting to the web page, getting the data, and now as I'm seeing the data, I'm thinking, okay, wait a sec, the headers are all wrong. They are not column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They should be this column, this row here. So in order for us to do that, we would like to take this and move it into the header area. Likewise, if there is any extra characters like this, we want to delete them. And if there is any extra blank spaces here, we want to treat that as well. So that's all we are going to do. To begin with, we are going to take this row number 1 and make it a header. If for you, when you loaded the data, this was already the header, you can ignore this step. So from the home ribbon, we can use the use first row as headers button here. When you click on that, this row will become the header and it will discard the previous headers. Now that that step is done, we're going to look at the NOC column here. This is actually the member country or country. So I'm going to double click on that column and then call this as country. And then wherever there is an extra symbol like this asterisk, we would like to take it out. So we can do that through a find replace kind of an operation. You can just right click on this column and then select replace values. In here, I'm going to say replace the star with nothing. So I'm not going to type anything here. And when you click OK, that star from Japan is going to go off. You can also, because there is only one host nation this time around, directly replace Japan star with Japan. You might be thinking, okay, this all looks a bit manual. What if I need to do it again with a different kind of data? Well, the beautiful thing about Power Query is as you do these steps, they will be recorded here. And these steps, once they're recorded, if you connect to a different table and you need to do those exact steps again, you can just refresh the query and it will run all of those steps against that new file automatically. Next up, we're going to look at this rank column. Wherever there is a blank value, we want to fill the value from above because it's a shared rank. The reason why these nulls are happening is if you look at the rank table here, further down, wherever there is a shared rank, in this case 36 between Greece and Uganda, it's actually a merged cell here, and that's why it kind of only looks like the first country has the value. So we're going to select this column and then go to the transform ribbon and use an operation called fill. Fill down. This is essentially going to take the value from cell above and fill it down. And now we no longer have any nulls. 36 is repeated. And likewise, if the countries share the rank, like here 46, that's also going to get repeated. Let's say as part of the analysis, I would like to find out what percentage of total medals are from the gold medals. So to do that, first up, we are going to take all of these columns. You can select the first column, the gold medal column, hold down shift and select the last column. So you're grabbing all the columns. and see how Power Query in my case thinks these are ABC or text values. So I'm going to right click and then say change type to a whole number. Now that they're converted into number values, we can calculate this number as a percentage of that number. To do this, we'll select this column, hold down Control and select the second column. This way we are grabbing gold first and then the total medals. We want to add gold percentage as a new column. So we're going to go to the add column ribbon, and from here we are going to do a standard arithmetic operation. So select this standard, and from here let's do a division. This is going to take this value here, divide that with that and calculate the fraction here. For example, for United States, 39 gold medals out of 113 medals, and that comes up to be 0.34 as the value. We just want to see this as a percentage, so I'm going to select this column, right click and then change type to percentage. Alright, we are nearly done, but there is one extra problem with this data, and that kind of thing is hard to spot unless we start scrolling. Let's go all the way down here and you'll see that there is actually a total row as well with total 93 entries and then all the medals, etc. We don't probably need this kind of thing when you are analyzing the data in either Excel or Power Query. So we want to take out this row. This kind of an operation is called filtering. One way of thinking about filtering is it's like adding a where clause inside SQL. So we want to take out this total row. For this, we can easily go into either the rank column or the country column. I'm going to go into the rank column and then scroll all the way down and uncheck the total row. That's going to go off. Now let's take a look at the step that we have done and what it is showing as the code here. In order to see this code, you will need the formula bar. So I recommend going to the view ribbon and enabling the formula bar. This is a one-time step. Once you do it, it will stay on for all of your Power Queries in other Excel files. So let's take a look at this filtered row here. It is saying if rank not equal to totals 93 entries. So it's actually very specific. Let's say you connect this entire thing to 2016 Olympics table or 2012 Olympics table, and then there the total row is not totals 93 entries, it is totals 112 entries or something like that. In that case, this thing is not going to work. So this is where, while Power Query is a very powerful and extremely valuable tool, it is also a little bit like a dumb robot. All it does is it listens to your actions and records the steps. So if you are doing any step that needs to change when the data changes, you will need to be a little bit smarter with these kind of filters. For now, I leave off that part, but I have got other videos on the channel that go much more in depth into Power Query. So do check them out if you want to learn more tricks on how to handle these kind of issues. Let's do one last thing, which is we want to load this data into Excel, but before loading, we want to give it a proper name. This name here, 2020 Summer Olympics Medal Table within square brackets 36, is a very bad name. So I'm going to select this entire name column here and then type it as medals. That's it. We have now successfully set up our first Power Query web scraping example. In this case, it's going to a Wikipedia page and getting the data. Let's go ahead and see this data in Excel. You can go back to Excel by using the home ribbon's close and load button. When you click on that, it's gonna get the data and load it into Excel as a nice little table. So here we are with all the medals information neatly available to us. Notice that the division is now back to a decimal format. We can go to home and apply the percentage formatting here again to see that as a percentage. The beautiful thing about what we have just done is it is a dynamic living connection against the Wikipedia page. So for example, if something were to happen, of course, nothing's going to happen. These medals are kind of frozen. But if something were to happen and some of these numbers were to change, then all you have to do is come back here, right click on this table and refresh it. You can also select the table cell and go to the query ribbon, and from here you can also hit the refresh button. When you refresh, it's going to execute all of these steps again against the Wikipedia page and get you the latest values here again. As this data comes to Excel as a table, you can also use this data in formulas, pivot tables, or anything else that you normally do inside Excel. Like maybe you can make a graph of how many gold medals are there for each country by selecting these two columns and inserting a graph. Of course, with so many countries, it's going to look a little bit busy. For our second example on Power Query, let's go to something a little bit more business-like. Here I have got a sample staff data file. This is the data set that we are maintaining at Awesome Chocolates about all our staff. And let's say you work as a human resources analyst in the company. So you want to connect to this file and load up the data into Excel to do some analysis. How are we going to do that? So first up, we'll close this file. We'll come to the same file here where we are getting the Olympic medal data. And this time we're going to go to the data ribbon and get the data from file from Excel workbook. Make a note that even though I'm using Excel workbook as an example, we could do the same thing even when the data is in a text file or on a PDF or in a SharePoint folder. The steps are exactly same, but for the sake of convenience, I'm using Excel as a source data. And we're going to point to this file. If you need a copy of this file, refer to the video description to grab this. Again, we'll get a familiar navigator screen. This time we are navigating an Excel file. So it's going to show you all the spreadsheets and any named ranges and tables if you have in that file. So we'll select the staff data file. This is what I want to load. And I'm going to say transform data because we would like to fix some problems with the data. If you see carefully, there are some null values in the gender column. Some departments have question marks, and probably there is some other issues with the data as well. So let's hit on the transform data. And this time again, we are back in Power Query. Now you can see there are two queries. We have got the medal query and the staff query. So while you are in Power Query, you can work on the staff data. But if you change your mind and if you want to do something with the medal data, you can just tap on that and go back here to do some more things. Let's go to the staff data. And again, we are going to repeat the steps, which is to make this row as the header. Keep in mind that by default, Power Query may already promote this as a header. I have turned off that option because I would like to take control over these things. But by default, Power Query would like to promote this. If you want to adjust some of these settings, you can also go to the file menu here and use the options and settings and query options button here. For now, let's take this row and make it a header. So we're going to go to the home ribbon and use first row as headers. The next thing that we are going to do is we're going to carefully scan these columns and see if there are any issues that need fixing. As I eyeball this information, I can already sense there is a lot of things wrong with the data. For example, we have got these null values in the gender column that needs fixing, question marks in the department column that needs addressing, and some of these dates are left aligned, some of them are right aligned, indicating that the data type is wrong here. So we'll need to fix that problem as well. Likewise, we have got some FTE information. Some people work full-time, some people work 0.8, 0.9, and we would like to do some calculation on top of the FTE. For example, if somebody is not working one or full-time, then I want to tag them as part-time employee in our data. Likewise, on further careful exploration of this data, you might notice that there are some names that have these extra spaces in the beginning. You can see that they don't quite attach to the line in the left-hand side, and that means there is some extra spaces there. So we'll need to take out those spaces as well. So let's go one at a time. First up, we're going to address the name column here. To fix the problem in the name column, we want to remove those extra spaces. This kind of an operation is called trimming. And you can do this by selecting the column and right-clicking from here and then using the transform trim option. Many times it is hard for us to remember exactly where these things are. So another handy trick that I use is I select the column. Whatever you find in the right-click menus is usually also listed in the up top ribbons there. So as we want to change the name in place, that kind of an operation is called transforming. So I will go into the transform ribbon and then I'll start looking around. So for this name, we want to transform it. We'll go to the transform ribbon and we are looking in the format area here and selecting the trim operation. This trim is going to remove any extra spaces at the beginning as well as the end. Now that extra spaces are gone, let's look at the gender column. Some employees don't have their gender information available in this data. So what we want to do is, rather than leave it as null, we want to first flag them as missing. But here is a little handy trick that you can also use. If you see, when you load the data into Power Query, it's also going to show this green bar up top. And when you hover your mouse on it, it's going to tell you how many values are present and how many are empty as well. And if there are some errors, it's going to show those as well. And it will give you a handy option to remove those empty values. Of course, we don't want to remove those empty values. We want to just flag them. So this kind of a thing is called column quality indicator. Normally, when I load the data, I always make a point to look at the column quality indicator to make sure that we have got good quality data all the way through in all the columns. So to fix this problem, I'm going to select the gender column, right click and then say replace values. And this time around, we are going to replace the nulls. So we are going to write null in the small letters and then replace this with missing as the value. Now all those null gender values will become the missing. And this way, when I load it into Excel, I can filter on this data and I can do some further checks or follow-ups on that information. Again, as you're doing each of these steps, you can see in the applied steps, those will get recorded. Let's say you have done the replacement with missing, but you had a change of mind. You don't want to say missing. You want to write some other word like, need to check or something like that. How do you change your mind? It's a really simple thing. You can look at the step that you want to edit. And for most steps, you will find a little gear icon right next to it. So you can just click on that gear icon and then write the other word here. You can use the same trick if you ever have a scenario where the file path has changed. So for example, in the source step, we are connecting to the Excel file. If I have to connect to a new file, I'll click on the gear icon there, and then I can point to a different path here. I can use the browse button or I can copy paste the information here. Just as you have got a gear button next to each step, for each step, there is also a X button. If you don't want to run a particular step, you can delete it. Right now, I do want to run all these steps, so I'm not deleting anything, but this is how you can remove a step if you want to ever change things. Now let's take a look at the department column. Wherever there is a question mark, this is happening because of some data entry error. So those question marks should have actually been the engineering department, but our payroll people were a bit lazy and they were not recording this correctly. So we want to do that. We will again add a replacement rule. This time we want to replace the 3 question marks with engineering. Let's take a look at the salary column. Salary column also has 11 empty values. I want to see what's going on. If somebody is not getting paid, why are they even in our company? So some people have 0 salary. Some people have null salary. The 0 salary is still technically a number, so it's being considered, but the nulls are a problem. Let's say, for the sake of simplicity, the reason why these zeros are happening is, or zeros and nulls are happening is, because they no longer work in the organization. It's just that we were lazy and we did not remove them from the staff file. So if someone's salary is either 0 or null, we don't want that information anymore because they're no longer here. We can do this with a filter operation. You can just click on this little button here and uncheck null and 0 and click OK. Now those people are gone and you can see the green bar is all the way green here. You can also check for the condition that is being used by Power Query here. It is saying salary is not null and salary is not 0. So both conditions need to be met. If you are wondering what kind of language this is, this uses a special language called M language. And again, I do have other videos on the channel that go a bit more in depth into this. So feel free to check that for learning a bit more about this M language. Now comes the most fun as well as probably the most annoying problem when you're working with the dates in any kind of system. It's that if the dates are not consistently maintained, then formatting and working with them becomes a pain. So here you can see what is happening. Some dates are left aligned, some dates are right aligned. It is just a mess. Power Query makes this problem almost trivial. All you have to do is just right click on this column, change type, and then select the date option. Bingo. All the values are automatically converted into proper date. And you'll see that there is also a calendar symbol up top indicating that the data type conversion is now done. This column is flagged as a date. This is not the only way of dealing with the date problems. Power Query also offers even more powerful options if you ever want to deal with more complicated or messed up date values. Again, I do have other Power Query videos on the channel. Do check them if you want to learn a bit more. The FTE is all right. Employee type and work locations are all right. So now that all the data is in a clean state, let's go ahead and add a few more columns that help us explore the functionality of Power Query. We're going to start our journey with the name column. Instead of having one long name like this, we want to have first name and everything else, or first name and last name as two columns. To do this, we'll select the name column and we are going to use the transform ribbons split column feature. So we can select this split column and we are going to use delimiter. But if you ever want to do it by number of characters or positions or anything else, you can refer to these additional options there. So I'll use the delimiter, and the delimiter would be space. Again, you can select different kind of delimiters from here. And I just want to split it once at the leftmost delimiter. So we'll select that and click OK. This is going to create two columns for us, name 1 and name 2. Name 1 is my first name, so I'll double click on that and type first name. And name 2 is last name. You might be thinking, okay, this is fine, but what if somebody has a middle name as well? So for example, here we have got Nazir and Basha Mustafa as the middle name and last name. So maybe you don't want to have everything, just the last name alone here. One way of dealing with that problem is we can select this. First of all, there is some inconsistent spacing, so I'm going to trim this. I'll go to transform trim so that that extra spaces, if there is any in the beginning, are gone. And now what we want to do is again split this, but from the right hand side this time. So we'll select this and use the transform split column by delimiter, same space, but this time we are going to go from the right hand side and click OK. So this is going to split that and leave the values here as Basha, and whatever else is there, that would be the middle name. As we no longer care for this middle name, I can remove this. But if you want to keep it, you can also rename this column as middle name. I'm going to just remove this, right click and remove, and then rename this column as last name. Now let's take a look at the salary column. In the salary, we have got all kinds of numbers, but I want to tag our employees by 3 buckets: under 50K, 50 to 100K, and more than 100K. Before we do that, let's convert the salary column into a number. Right now it says ABC123, so it could be either number or text. Well, technically there is no text values here. So I'm going to right click on this, change type to a decimal number. Now let's add a salary bucket column. For this, we are going to go into the add column and we want to create 3 buckets: under 50K, 50 to 100K, and more than 100K. These kind of columns are called conditional columns. You can see that in the add column, there are different kinds of columns that we can add. But we are going to use just the conditional column option here. And we have already selected salary, and I'm going to name this as salary bucket. And here we're going to select the salary, and you just create a if condition ladder here. This is kind of self-explanatory. If salary is less than 50,000, then I'm going to say under 50K. We're going to add one more clause. If salary is less than 100K, then it's going to be 50K to 100K. And if none of these conditions are true, that means they must be above 100K. So it will be above 100K. Click OK, and you will instantly have a salary bucket column added. Usually when you add a column, it goes all the way to the end of the table. You can move it next to the salary column by clicking and dragging and dropping it next here. So that way, when you get into Excel, these columns stay together. The date problem is already fixed. Given the start date, if you want, you can also calculate what is the tenure or age of the employee. Age as in how long they have been in the organization. To do that, we can select the start date column. Again, using the add column, you need to make sure that this is actually a date. So date formatting is essential. Once it is there in the add column, you'll find that this date ribbon, date buttons are activated. From here, you can calculate the age. This is going to tell you how long that employee has been within our organization as of today. So here it says 2048, but by the time you run it, it will depend on the current date. Right now, I am recording it on 21st of June 2024. So this number might be different for you. This tells you in the days. So it says 2048.000000. Let's say you want to see this in a different format. You can select this and go to transform and use the duration buttons here to convert this into a different format. Maybe we want to see this in years. So I'm going to use the duration total years, and we can see how many years each employee has been with our organization. The very first employee in the data has been here for 5.61 years. Again, a note of caution, this number would be different depending on when you are running this operation. Our final thing is we're going to look at the FTE column and add a full-time / part-time kind of a thing. This time also we can use the add column and the conditional column option here, but we have already done that. So I'm going to show you the custom column option. This is where you can write a little bit of Power Query M language code yourself. Of course, this is not necessary as this kind of a thing can be done sufficiently with the conditional column. But let's just take a look at this. So we'll select this custom column, and here I'm going to call this as employee type. And we're going to write a condition. This condition is if, and select the FTE, insert that if FTE is equal to 1, then the output that I want is full-time, else part-time. So this is how you can write a condition. You simply say if column condition, then whatever is the output that you want, else whatever is the output. Let's click OK, and you will have the full-time, part-time tagging of the employees here. I forgot that we already have an employee type column. So this is why when you named it, it kind of changed it to type.1. I'm going to go into edit the step. And you can see that when I'm editing, it actually took me back to the conditional column because it saw that it was a simple if condition. So it kind of converted that back to this thing. Here I'm going to rename this as employee work type. So that's the column name, and all of the data is now in a clean format the way that I want. I can now go ahead and load this. We're going to go and hit on the home ribbon here and click on close and load. This is going to create a spreadsheet with your employee data and clean it up nicely for us. Notice that all of this is dynamic. So if my source file changes, I'm going to open that file for you right now. Make a note of these 3 people. They're all on 120,000. I'm going to change this person's salary to 98,000. Let's save this, Control S, and close this file. Now we come back to this file, and you can refresh this query by right clicking and hitting the refresh button. So we are looking for this value to change to 98 and this condition to also change. Right click, refresh, and boom, we have the new information here. The same works even when you add new data at the bottom of that file. If you add 5 more employees, they will all happily appear at the end of the table here. Now that we have used Power Query to clean the data and bring it in a neat structure into Excel, let's go ahead and understand some of the essential Excel formulas and functions. We are going to attempt these 10 business questions and along the way discover many of the powerful, popular, and really useful Excel functions. So the 10 problems that we are going to look are these. As you can see, they go from easy to difficult, with these 3 being more complex ones. So let's go ahead and solve each of them, and along the way we are going to learn all of these essential Excel functions and formulas, as well as concepts like using operators like star, hash, etc. Let's go one at a time. A quick note about the data. The data is human resources data of our employees and their gender, department, salaries, and other information. We have been using this data on and off in the previous lessons. But if you look at this data is neatly structured in an Excel table with the table name staff. You can grab a copy of this data file along with these concepts in the video description link below. So our first one is total salary and head count by department. As we have got lots of data, let's say you have got an upcoming HR meeting and you just want to explain to the meeting that we have got all of these 6 or 7 departments and how many people work in each department and what is the total amount of salary we pay in the departments. To do this kind of a thing, we are going to add a new sheet. I'm going to call this as 1, and in here we want to list all the departments, their head counts, and their total salaries. Let's set up the report format like that, and here I want to list all the departments. For now, what we are going to do is we are going to go to the data table here and copy the entire department values, Control C, come back here, right click and paste as values. This will give you all the departments, but you can see that departments like business development here are repeated many times. So once the data is there, I can select this entire column and use the data ribbon remove duplicates option to just remove all the duplicate department names. For now, I'm just going to select without expanding and just say remove duplicates and click OK. And that's going to take out all the duplicate values and leave 1 per department like that. So here we no longer have those duplicates and we have the department information. They will appear in the order we pasted them, but if you want, you can also sort this data. Next up, let's go ahead and figure out how many people work in each department. For this kind of a thing, we want to count in the data all the employees that are in the training department. So essentially, we want to look at how many times this word training has appeared in the table here. To do this kind of a thing, we can use the COUNTIFS function. So that's the first concept that we are going to learn. We can say COUNTIFS. So this function, it's going to count by applying various conditions. So first option for this is the criteria range, and this is my staff table. So staff square bracket, and we can point to the department column directly like that, comma, and what is the name of the department. Now the name of the department we can write in double quotes like training, but as we already have the value here, it's better to just point to the value there directly in B3. And when you close bracket, you're going to get the value as 24. To see the department headcounts for all of these others, you just have to drag this formula down and you will get the headcounts for everybody else. Now here is a pro trick. If you are using Excel 365, you can also, instead of saying B3, as we do need the headcounts for all of these departments, take the B3 out and point to this entire range here directly. What this does is it's going to count individual departments and automatically show the entire range for you here directly. So see what happens when I hit enter. You're going to get this entire values here. This is called spilling, and it only works in Excel 365 or Excel on the web. So if you're using an older version of Excel like Excel 2016 or 2013, then you will not be able to do that. You will have to write one formula and then drag it down. Let's do the same for total salary. This time we are not interested in counting. Rather, we want to add up all these values, the salary values, where the department is training. To do this kind of a thing, we will use a function called SUMIFS. So here is how you can write it. SUMIFS And this time you'll need to specify what is the range that you want to sum up. So the range is staff table, salary column, and the criteria range is staff table, department column is here. And again, if you're using Excel 365, you can just drag this whole thing directly there. And that's going to give you total salaries for each department here directly. You can select this entire column and apply a currency formatting like that so that we can see the values in millions. So for example, training department with 24 people, the total salary is 2,013,000 something. Whereas engineering department with 26 people is 2.1 million. Given these two sets of information, you may also want to calculate something like average salary. So let's go ahead and do that quickly. And here you can use the AVERAGEIFS function to directly do it against the data. You can also alternatively take this number and divide that with that number to come up with the average here. Let's go ahead and use the AVERAGEIFS instead. So here I want to get the average salary. So we're going to again say staff table salary column is what we want to average. Staff table department is here. And even this formula, you can select multiple values like that, and it's going to tell you what the average is. And this tells you a better story. So for example, here I can see the training department has a higher average of $83,884 as against something like engineering, which has 81, or marketing, which has 64,000. Before we move on to the second concept, let me give you a small challenge. So just as we have calculated total salary and headcount, can you calculate the permanent headcount? This is where in the data table, you can see that some employees are permanent staff, like all of these people here, but we also have other kinds of people in our data. So further down, you will find that we have got fixed term staff, and even further down, there are some temporary staff. So I don't want to count all of these fixed term and temporary people, just the permanent people in each department. How would you do that? Give it a try and add that as a column here. Our second business question is, let's say we want to look at all the employees with more than 100,000 salary. You can do this in two ways. One is you can use manual filters, and the other one is you can also use the filter function. First, let's try with manual filters, and then I'll introduce you to the filter function, which we then go in elaborate more in the next example. So here in the data, let's say you're in a hurry and you just want to see every employee with more than 100K salary. You can apply the filters by pressing Ctrl+Shift+L on your data. And once the filters are added, you can use this thing here, number filters greater than, and then type the salary limit. When you hit enter, you're going to see all the people with more than 100K salary. That is a lot of people in this chocolate company. And here in the status bar, you can also see how many records are found. So for example, 47 out of 260 people have more than 100,000 salary. Now let's say you don't want to manually apply the filters. You would want to see this extract in a sheet like this. Here we can use the filter function for that purpose. This function is a new formula added to Excel 365, and it is a really powerful function that can be used to extract subsets of data that meet criteria. So we're going to say filter, and we would like to see the entire staff data. So I'm going to say staff, and then include is where you specify the criteria. So the criteria is a really simple one. Staff table salary column needs to be more than 100,000. So we'll just say greater than and then write the 100,000. And when you close bracket and hit enter, it's going to give you that filtered list here as a spilled range. You can see that, it automatically expands to all these columns and rows and shows you all the data. You can double check this by selecting all of this data. You can see that here when I selected, I have the same count of 47 values. One problem with the filter function is it only filters the data. It doesn't apply the formatting. So for example, all of these here, they were nicely formatted as a date in my data. Whereas here, I see them as number representation because Excel thinks dates are numbers. You can pre-select the entire range where your filter formula may go and apply date formatting to that, so that automatically when the filter formula does its thing, it will show you in the date formatting. Same for these numbers, you can apply decimal formatting, and here you can apply the currency formatting. Many times when we use filter, you may want to not just see the data, but also the header information up top. So for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this entire range, make it bold and fill a color. And now in this cell here, I'll just ask Excel to get me the same headers as my staff table. So for this, we are going to say staff table, open bracket. And if you scroll all the way down, you can see that we can also access the headers of the table. For this, you need to use hash headers as an option. You can just scroll down and select this, double click. So Excel writes it for you. Close the square brackets and hit enter. And you're going to get the headers as they were written in the data table. When you are looking at it, you might think, okay, Chandoo, this is all good, but for my extract, I don't need to see all of these columns. All I care about is employee ID, their names, first name, last name, and everything, department, and salary values. So you don't want everything, you just want a subset of the data. This is where we can combine the filter function with a different function like CHOOSECOLS to tell Excel that once the filter has done its job, we would like to see, for example, column number 1, 2, 3. We don't want to see 4. We want to see 5 and 6th column. So let's give it a go. So here I have set up an area for us. I want to see all employees with greater than 100K salary, but just the columns 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. So here we are going to say filter staff table salary greater than 100,000. While we are at it, instead of hard coding this number like that, you can also put it as an input cell value. So I'm going to point to this cell here, which is F67. Right now F67 is blank, but we are going to fix that in a second. And when you hit enter, as initially F67 is blank, it's going to give me everything because it's thinking greater than 0. Now in this cell here, I'm going to type 100,000. And you'll see that as soon as I type, I'll get a subset of people. But I can go even higher. So for example, I can go 115 and we'll see even fewer people. Now, we don't want to see all these columns as I mentioned. We just want to see a subset of the columns. So we will take the filter function and send this to the CHOOSECOLS function. And here we are going to now learn a powerful concept called nesting. This is where we take the output of a formula and then pass it to another formula so that you could do more powerful things. So this new function is called CHOOSECOLS, and we are going to say, take this entire filter output and from this, give me column number 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. You can comma separate and mention any number of columns, and when you hit enter, you're going to get just those columns directly. Again, a quick note of caution, both these functions, CHOOSECOLS and filter, are only available in Excel 365 or Excel on the web. If you are using an old version of Excel, unfortunately, these kind of formulas are not possible. Now that these are done, you may also want to add a cherry on the top by setting the headers correctly. For this, again, we are going to do the same thing, and this time we are going to say staff hash headers. And this is going to give you all the headers like you see earlier. But we also don't need all the headers. We only need the headers 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. So we can pass the CHOOSECOLS to this as well. We can say CHOOSECOLS from the headers 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. And that's going to give you only those headers from the table. and that data point. And all of this is dynamic. So if I change my requirement and say I want to look at, for example, 108,000, I'm going to see all of those employees here. Later on in this video, I'll tell you how to access individual columns of this data. For example, you may want to count how many such people are there, or you may want to average all of these salaries. How to do that, we're going to cover in the later on aspects of this video. Our third business question is all female employees with more than 100K salary. And here we are going to kind of piggyback on what we already did. So instead of writing new formulas, I have set up this worksheet as all such female employees, and we want to see columns 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. To do that, we can use multiple conditions in filter function. So we are going to go back to the same filter, staff table, and then staff table salary is greater than the F67 cell, but that's not enough. We also need to check for the gender of the employee and then make sure that we are only looking at female employees. So when you want to write multiple conditions, you need to start by putting brackets around each condition, and then the second condition needs to be multiplied with the first one. So we'll write star, open bracket, and then inside here we write the second condition. So staff table gender is female. Again, you could hard code these values here. You could also, for example, link it to a cell like this one here and then use that as an input cell. I'm just going to hard code because our question itself is female employees. Once this part is done, you can close the filter formula altogether and hit enter, and you're going to see just a subset of employees. And here you can see clearly that we are only looking at the female employees. This time around, we would like to see the gender column as well, which is the fourth column. So I'm going to adjust this as columns 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, as these columns are all continuous and they start from 1 and go up to 6, you can also use a different version of the filter rather than the choose columns option. So here, instead of saying staff, I can say in the staff table. So we can open a square bracket to say in the staff table. And then you can open one more square bracket and then select the first column that you want to extract. This is employee ID. Close this square bracket, colon, and then open one more square bracket and then select the salary column as the last one. Close all these square brackets, and essentially what you're saying here is, if you look closely, you're saying in the staff table, I want to start with the employee ID column and then I want to go up to the salary column. So you want every column in between from employee ID to salary. And once you say it like that, this filter function is just going to give you those 6 columns instead of everything. So this is a much better syntax than the choose columns one because our columns are continuous and they go from 1 to 6. You could use the same approach when you have 3 to 7 or 6 to 9 or something like that as well. Time for another challenge. While looking at the female employees with more than 100K salary or whatever was the F67 value, if you also want to add one more condition that says those employees must have joined our organization in the year 2020 or after. So if you look at the data table here, we have got a start date as well. And essentially we are looking at employees who are with us in these 2 years alone. So we don't want to pay attention to this 2 years. How would you do that? Give it a try and let me know in the comments. Now let's go to the next one, which is I want to look at the lowest, highest, and top 5 salary values. And here we are going to learn about min, max, large, and sort plus take functions. All these 3 functions, min, max, and large, are available in most versions of Excel, but the sort and take functions are only available in Excel 365. Let's take a look at them. So here we would like to first try this for all employees and then eventually do this for male and female as well. So if I just want to get the lowest value across all the employees, we can straight away use the min function for that. Minimum of staff table salary column. And that just tells you what that value is. It's $28,160. Let's apply currency formatting on all these cells. You can select all the cells and you can use this key, or you can also press Ctrl Shift 4. For the highest salary, the logic is similar. We just use the max function, max of staff table salary column. And that's going to come up with the value. As the value is too big for the cell, Excel is showing me these hashes. Let's make this column wide enough. And there is the value. How do we get the top 5 salaries? These are the highest 5 salaries. And to get these, we can use the large function. We can say large staff table salary column. And then you can specify the K value. K is going to be 1 for the first person, and that'll be 120,000. And in the next cell, we write the exact same formula, large staff table salary, but this time we say 2. Coincidentally, the second highest salary is also 120,000. And then when you add the rest of the numbers, you're going to get these. Normally, when you're using the large formula, you may want to set up the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a range like this. And then instead of writing these values, you can point to the cell like that. That way you can drag this formula down and you get to see all the values by referencing these. Many times when we use these kind of things, you don't want these to be visible when you create this report for your colleagues or managers. You can also hide this column so that the numbers stay there and help you calculate the values, but they're not obstructing the view or don't make it look clumsy. So that is how we can do this part. But if I'm interested in all employees, let me show you an alternative for these values, the top 5, using a different version that we could do with the sort and take function. Excel 365 adds new powerful functions to work with all of your data, and one of them is the sort function. So for example, if I simply say sort my staff table salary column and hit enter, I'm going to get all the salaries, not just the top 5, from lowest salary here up to the highest salary, the 120,000, all the way at the bottom. Here we are. We can take this sort formula and tell it that when you are sorting, sort it in the descending order. So that's the third parameter. The index is used if you have bigger data and you just want to sort it on a specific column. And here, if I say -1, I'm going to see 120,000 up top with all of these values. Now, once a sort has finished its thing, I don't want to see everything. I just want to see these 5 rows. So this is where there is also a take function. What it does is it takes a certain number of rows or columns from your data. So after sorting has done its job, just take the first 5 rows. So take 5 is going to give you only those 5 values. So this is another way of getting the top 5 salaries. In this case, we are sorting this entire data. You can also use other variations for these formulas to get the top 5 values, and each of them have its own advantages. For example, with the take approach, if I change my mind and I want to see 10 values, I can easily update this to 10. In fact, you can also take this out, the number 5, no pun intended, and link it to a cell. So for example, let's link it to this cell here. So I'm going to say I12. As I12 is blank, we're going to get a calc error. But now if I go here and then put 10 there, I'm going to get all the 10 values. Remember, with these kind of spilling formulas, Excel only gets you the value. The formatting doesn't happen. So it's a good idea to pre-format the values so that if and when the spill happens, you will see the formatting. And now this is a dynamic thing. So I can change this 10 to, for example, 5 or 8, and I'll get that many employees. How awesome is this? Now let's take it up a notch, and instead of looking at just all employees, let's figure out how to do it only for male employees or only for female employees. As a challenge, try to take it up yourself, but I'm going to show you my solutions now. To get the lowest salary only for male employees, we can use the MINIFS function. This is available since Excel 2019 or 2016, I believe. So it's been around for a while, and what it does is it will tell you the minimum value by applying a criteria. Just like we have got COUNTIFS, SUMIFS, and AVERAGEIFS, this also works the same way. So here, staff table, salary column, staff table gender is same as whatever I have in D3. And you can lock this as $3 by changing the reference style. You can either manually type this dollar symbol, or you can, while typing this, press the F4 key a few times so that the dollar gets added automatically. So we now get the male one as 28,160. I think the lowest employee is the male employee, and that's why these two values match. Let's copy and paste this for female, and we'll see the female value is slightly different. Let's do the maximum. Just as there is minifs, there is also a maxifs function, and we can say staff table, salary column, staff table gender is here. And again, I'm going to change the reference style to $3. While there is a difference in minimum values, the maximum value is exactly same whether you are male or female. I guess we have got employees in both. But how do we do it for the top 5? This is going to be a bit tricky, but not impossible. To get the top 5 salaries for male and female employees, we can use the filter function first. So for example, we can say filter staff table salary column staff table gender is equal to male. And what that's going to do is it's going to give you all the male salaries and spill them down here. So everybody's salary is going to be here if their gender is male. We can then send this filter output to either large or sort and take. I'm going to send this to the large function, large of this, and we are going to refer to that hidden column. So it's between F and H, G6, and I'll get the 120. And when I drag this down, I'll get all the 5 salaries of top 5 male employees. And I can copy this and paste it here, and we get an error. This is because the G has become H. So I'm going to change this reference again and fill this down, and we will get the top 5 female salaries. You may want to double check these numbers against the data, and that's really simple. If you go to the data, you can, for example, clear the filters on the salary and apply the filter on gender. Let's look at male. While looking at male employees, if you expand the salary filter, you should see the top 5 values at the bottom here. These are the top 5, 120 to 114, 691. And when you look at the calculation here, you should see the same numbers, 120 to 114, 691. Just as you're using the large function, you could also use the sort and take approach on the filtered data. I leave this bit to you as homework. Let's go to the next one. Our next question is list all the departments. And this kind of piggybacks on what we did in question 1. In order to get the total salary and headcount by department, we were using the remove duplicates feature of Excel. But now we are going to use the unique function. This is also a new function available in Excel 365, and it is quite helpful if you know how to use this. So here I have set up a page for our department names, and I just want to see all the departments here. We can use the unique function like this, unique of staff table department column. And when you hit enter, it's going to remove all the duplicates and you'll just get all the 12 department names. This is going to list the items in the order they appear in the data. So if you look at the data, you can see that the very first department is training, the next one is business development, and then engineering. And that is how they appear here. Many times when you are doing this kind of a thing, you may also want to alphabetically sort them. So you could use the sort function on top of the department to sort them in the alphabetical order. So now you have accounting up top and training all the way at the bottom. Let's say you want to count how many departments are there. You could of course select them and look at the status bar here to see what that count is, but that is kind of lame. So let's go ahead and count them. Here I'm going to say count, and we can use the function count A. As these are text values, you need to use the count A function, which is helpful for counting everything. Open bracket and select this range. Now we know that the departments begin from B4, but we don't know how far they go. In this case, there are 12 departments, but in future we might do a reorg and there might be 20 departments. So this can go forever. So how far down should you count? This is where when you have a formula that is spilling the values down, Excel gives you a new operator called hash. What this does is it basically tells my formula begins on B4 and it is spilling. Just go ahead and get me everything. So let's use that B4 hash, close bracket, and you can see that B4 hash actually refers to all of these values. When you hit enter, you're going to get 12. Now let's go ahead and do some reorganization. I'm going to go to the department data here and let's take some of these business development and make them business growth. So now I have got a new department called business growth, and when you see here, bingo, we get 13 and that growth also appears here. So that is what this does. It automatically sees that your spill range has grown and it gets the new values directly. Let me give you a small piece of challenge at this point. What if you want to see all the departments in one cell, comma separated? How would you do that? Give it a try. Our next two examples involve working with the data and looking up specific information. And we are going to learn all of these formulas along the way. VLOOKUP, index match, XLOOKUP, and IFERROR. Let's say you are looking at your data and you want to find information about a specific employee. Maybe you have their last name or you have their employee ID. So maybe you want to look at this person, PROZ1306. One easy way of doing this is you can apply the filters and you can search for what you're looking for. As you type, Excel automatically finds them, and when you click OK, you're going to get their row here isolated and you can get all the information. But this is manual and it requires you to do this filtering repetitively every time you have to look up someone else. So this is where the lookup formulas in Excel come in handy. There are quite a few of them and we are going to cover a majority of them in this next segment. So here I have set up the lookup worksheet, and let's say we want to look up PRO3886 as the person. I want to get all of this information for that. But notice that this C4 is an input cell, so I can type in a different number and I would like to see those values updated. Later on, we are going to find out how to build a search with the last name and learn the index match formula. But first, let's take a look at VLOOKUP. What VLOOKUP does is it vertically looks up data. So if you look at the data, it vertically looks up for an employee ID. And once it finds the ID, it's going to tell you the corresponding information. So here we are going to do VLOOKUP. It starts with the lookup value, and that's the value that we are looking up for, C4. And where do you want to look up? In the staff table. The lookup will always happen in the first column of staff table. So whatever you say, it will happen against the very first column. And then what is the column that you want to get? Now here in my staff table, you can see that we are looking up on the employee ID, and then we want to get the first name, which is the second column. If you start counting from here, this is first column, second, third, 4, 5, like that. So in this case, the first name happens to be number 2. So we can go back and type 2 here. And this one is important. If you don't say anything, Excel is going to do an approximate match, which is going to mess things up for us. So we always want to say false here. And when you hit enter, you're going to see for that person, this is their first name. Let's double check this, 3886. So here they are. Ed is their first name. McNocketer is their last name, and accounting, and that's the value. So these are what we are looking for. Ed, we have already received that. So the last name is again a same VLOOKUP formula. You can directly copy this formula and paste it here. And this time change the number 2 to number 3. And for department, we can change this to 5. And for salary, we can change this to 6. One handy trick that I learned early on when I was working with these functions is, rather than manually typing these column numbers, you may want to set them up somewhere here or in a hidden column there. So for example, I would write 2, 3, 5, 6 here, and I might just gray them out so that they're not really there. And instead of writing it like that, I can point to that, and I'll make sure that C4 is absolute reference by changing the style to $C $4 like that. And this way I can just drag this formula down and all the values come. So at a later point, if I change my mind and maybe I want to see gender, which is the 4th column, I can just type 4 here and I can see that gender information there. Of course, I also need to change the wording there, but that's a different problem. Let's go back to salary. So this is how the VLOOKUP works. One problem with VLOOKUP is if there is no matching value, it's gonna just come up with an error. So for example, let's search for 3887. We don't have any such employee, so all of these formulas are gonna come up with #NA. One easy way to fix this is we can send this VLOOKUP output to IFERROR and then say, if the VLOOKUP is giving an error, print this message, not found. That way, if I don't have that person, I'll get not found. Again, note that this IFERROR is a simple check. It will look at the VLOOKUP output. If there is an error, it's gonna just print whatever you give there. But what if you're not looking for an ID, but something else like last name? In this case, if you see, the VLOOKUP function can only look up in the very first column, so my ID alone. But as we are interested in looking up in the last name column and then find the last name of SCAD or whatever else, we will need to use a different type of a lookup. And this is where there are a couple of options in Excel. My preferred option these days is to use XLOOKUP. Man, it takes a long while to write with my mouse. But if you are using an older version of Excel, you can also use the index match formulas. So first up, let's take a look at the index match and then I will introduce XLOOKUP to you. So here I have got my last name as SCAD and I want to look up their employee ID, department and salary. So first up, we need to find where this last name is in the bunch of data that we have. So if you look at the last name column, somewhere down here, we will have that person, SCAD here. This is the person. And if I know what is their row number in all of the data, then we can kind of go ahead and get other items from that row. So this is where the match function is helpful. We can say right here, for example, match SCAD in the staff table last name. And the match type is exact match. So we'll say 0. And that's going to tell you SCAD is the 43rd employee in the data. That means it's going from top to bottom. This person is 1 and SCAD would be 43. Now that I know 43 is the row in which my person that I'm interested in is, I can go ahead and ask questions like, what is the employee ID of the 43rd person? What is the department of 43rd person? And for this, Excel offers an index function. What index does is it looks at a data. So for example, staff table ID column, employee ID column, it can tell you what is the ID number 43. So you can type 43 directly here and then it'll tell you PR03532. We don't want to type 43. So we can point to the match cell calculation here and then that will also tell you. When you combine this whole thing into one formula, that is called index match. So normally this is how we write it, index of that, and then we say match scad in the staff table last name with 0 as the exact match and close bracket, and we will get PR03532. To get the department, it's the exact same formula. So we can copy this, and this time just change the first part from employee ID to department. And finally, to get the salary, again we can change this to salary, and we will get the salary of that person. Just as VLOOKUP wouldn't work if there is no value to find, if I type in a last name that doesn't exist in my data, so for example Khan, I'm gonna get all these values as NA again. And you can also use IFERROR around these functions to print a message like not found. But a more pressing problem would be, what if two people have the same last name? So in our data here, we do have some data like that. In fact, the very first rows itself have some duplication. Of course, the problem here is all of these data points are also similar. So to tell them apart, I'm going to change the salary of this second Tuxwell from 8696 to 85,000. So now different values are there, and let's see what happens if I search for Tuxwell. So if I come here and then say Tuxwell, we are going to get the very first employee and their salary value. So 80,695. This is how all lookup formulas work, whether you're using index match, VLOOKUP, or even the new XLOOKUP. Once they find a match, like Tuxwell in this example, they just tell you what the value is. They're not going to bother looking for the next such employee. And this is a limitation of all the lookup formulas. So if you want to see all the employees with the same last name, you want to use the filter function instead, which I have introduced earlier in this video. Now let's take a look at solving these exact problems using the XLOOKUP function. XLOOKUP is an improved version of the previous lookup formulas, that is VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, and index match, and it can do all of those things in one formula or one function. So that is why if you are using a modern version of Excel like Excel 365, I recommend just learning XLOOKUP and calling it a day rather than knowing all of these individual things. So let's try that here. I have got a separate area for all the XLOOKUP formulas, and we are going to again look up for this person PR03887 and then get the values. Remember, this doesn't exist, so I'm going to change this back to 3886, and let's take a look at the results with XLOOKUP. So here we write XLOOKUP. What is it that you're looking up for? So that value in C4, and then you'll say lookup array and return array separately. Lookup array refers to the range of data where you want to look up, and this would be the staff table employee ID column. Return array is what you want to get back once the lookup has done its job. So in this case, it would be the first name column. So staff table first name. And that's it. You don't need to specify anything like exact match or anything. By default, XLOOKUP is going to do the exact match and then give you the result. So here we'll get the same result as the VLOOKUP, but this is how that syntax looks. You might be thinking, okay, this looks exactly same. Where is the advantage of XLOOKUP? XLOOKUP offers many other advantages, and we're going to unpack those as we go along. But for now, let's calculate all of these values as well. I'm going to copy this formula as it is, paste it here, and just change the first name to last name. This time, department, and finally, salary. As you can see, the values do match. Now let's see what happens if I search for a value that doesn't exist. So 3887. We're going to get not found here because here I have put IFERROR, whereas the XLOOKUP just comes back with NA. So the first advantage of XLOOKUP is, while writing the formula itself, you can specify what to do if the value is not found. So this is an optional parameter for XLOOKUP, if not found. This way you don't have to write a IFERROR around it. It comes part of the formula itself. So here I can say not found, and that's how that will look. And we can apply the same logic for all of these as well. Let's go back to a value that exists. So here we have got that. And if you notice carefully the XLOOKUP, instead of saying the entire table, we are going to split the table into two parts. What is it that you're looking for and what is it that you want to get? This way, even when you are not looking against the ID, let's say you're looking up against the last name, like here in Tuxwell's case, we can just swap around the columns and we don't need an index match kind of a thing. So the second advantage of XLOOKUP is it can do what index match kind of a thing does, because it's not limited by looking up only in the first column. So here, for example, in this case, we can also use XLOOKUP like this. XLOOKUP, look up this value in the staff data last name column, and then get the staff data employee ID column. And optionally, we can also say not found as the error value, and we will get the same thing. And I can do the same for department and salary as well. Another advantage of XLOOKUP is instead of returning a single column, you can return multiple values. So for example, I want to look up Tuxwell and then get their entire record here, all of their information. I could do that. I can say entire data and then say XLOOKUP, look up this in the staff table last name column, and then get the entire staff table itself. Once Tuxwell is found, I want their entire data. And when you hit enter, it's going to give you that full row corresponding to Tuxwell. As our data is horizontal, here in this case, the data goes horizontally across the screen. That is how XLOOKUP is going to lay it out. But you can also use other formulas in Excel to transpose this, that is change from rows to columns. And to do that, we are going to say XLOOKUP this value in the staff table last name and get the staff table. And rather than pressing enter, send this entire thing to a function called transpose. This is going to take rows and turn them into columns. And when you hit enter, the values will come down on the screen like that. This is super helpful if you want to, for example, present the data by looking up and retrieving entire records and laying them out on the screen. Let's conclude this concept with one extra challenge for you. Can you find all the employees with $120,000 of salary? So that means we are looking up, but we are not stopping at the first employee. We want to see everybody. How would you do that? And if you need a hint, we already covered this concept earlier in this video. Now let's switch up the gears by looking at some complex business questions. Our 8th business problem is finding out the highest salaried person. Mind you, we are not interested in what is the highest salary, which we were able to get it with the max function. Instead, we want to know what is the name of such person. So here I am putting two formulas. One is the first such person with the highest salary. And if there are ties, then list of all the people here in this cell. To find the highest salary, we could use the max formula. You can say max of staff table salary column. And we'll see that that is 120,000. Like I said, we don't want to know the value here. We want to know who is that person. So we want to do a lookup against this max value in the salary column. So we will say XLOOKUP this value, the maximum value in the staff table salary column, and then get the staff table first name of the person. As we want maybe the full name, not just the first name, here is a little trick that you can use in XLOOKUP. When you are returning a value, you can specify a column or multiple columns or operations on columns. So I'm going to say ampersand within double quotes space ampersand. This is how you can combine first name and last name with the space in the middle. and then say staff last name. What this is going to do is it's going to look up the maximum salary in the salary column, and then for that person give you the first name and last name together as one value. So here we'll see that as Minerva record dot. Let's double check this in the data. If I go to the data and look at the salary and scroll all the way down and select 120,000, which is the highest value, and click OK, we'll see Minerva's name here. And that is the value that our XLOOKUP has come up with. But as you can see, there is also MIC value here. This person also makes the same salary. Both of them are sitting on 120,000. In this case, what we want is we don't want to stop at Minerva. We want to get both Minerva and MIC's names. So that's the next formula that we are going to do. This time we are going to use the filter function instead. So we're going to say filter staff table and first name column, staff table salary is equal to maximum of staff table salary. This is going to give both Minerva and MIC's values. Again, you're only going to get first name, but you can apply the same trick with filter as well. You can select this and then say instead of first name, ampersand within double quotes space, and then one more ampersand staff last name. That's going to give Minerva record dot and MIC's Strawberry both of their names in 2 cells. But what if I don't want to see in 2 cells? What if I want to see the whole names here, comma separated? We can take this entire filter output and send it to a function that can combine text values. Excel has the perfect function for that. It is the text join function. Text join, and you need to specify what delimiter to use. We want to use comma space as the delimiter, and for the next parameter we can just leave it out by typing another comma and then give the filter output. This is going to take the filter output and comma separate that and give you both names in one cell like this. So you can see Minerva record dot and MIC's Strawberry here as the values. Our next example is to get all the employees that have joined in the month of March. Mind you, in the data here, we have the start date and we are looking for March across any year. So here I have got an employee that joined on 30th March of 2021. And further down here, I have got another employee that joined on 24th of March 2020. So irrespective of which year it is, if they have joined our organization in the month of March, then I would like to see them. This is where, again, we can use the filter function to solve this problem in an elegant fashion. First of all, let me show you some tricks with the filter. For example, if I say filter staff data first name, and if I simply say James, I'm not even sure if we have a James. We don't have a James. Let's go get a name that exists. Hogan. So let's search for Hogan. We'll get their record. But if I want to see all the people whose name begins with the letter H, what we could do is instead of simply saying staff first name is like this, we can send this to a function like left of staff first name, comma 1, and that's going to get the leftmost character. And I can simply check that, is that equal to H? And we are going to get all these people whose names begin with the letter H. So within the filter function, and not just filter function by the way, even XLOOKUP and other kind of functions, you can use these kind of operations to extract portions of the data. So we are going to use the same technique, but this time look at the date. So instead of this, what we want to do is we want to say, look at the staff data and filter by looking at staff date joined. And we want to look at the start date of March. But let's just say you are interested in all the staff that have started since year 2020. You could also use greater than or equal to and then specify the date. For this, you could use the date function and then generate the date of 2021, which corresponds to 1st of January 2020. And when you hit enter, you're going to see all the staff that have joined on or after 1st of January 2020. We could use similar logic, but instead of greater than, we are going to take the start date and calculate the month of that. So for this, we'll say month of staff table start date is equal to 3. 3 corresponds to March, and you're going to see all the people that have joined in the months of March. I'm going to select this date column here and apply the date formatting. You could do that by Control-Shift-3. And here you can see all of these are in the month of March. Now remember, we are not done. We are not interested in all the columns. We just want to see employee ID, first name and last name. So the first part of this filter, instead of saying staff, I'm going to open square bracket and one more square bracket and select employee ID, close square bracket, colon, last name. That way we are saying when you're done filtering, just get me the 3 columns and nothing else. So here we got all these names. We can see Hogan, Vasavi, Carlin, etc. that have joined in the month of March. Before we move to the next one, I do have a challenge for you, and that is to get all the female employees that have started on a Monday. How would you do that? Let me know in the comments. Now let's go to the last example. This complex formula involves actually creating a report. So we want to make a department report that includes headcounts, salaries, and percentage of difference from the overall average, all visualized and presented in a neat format. So here I have set up a page for this report. Up top, we want to see what is happening for all the departments, and further down what is happening at an individual department. We want to see what is the headcount, average salary, percentage difference from the overall average, and what is the highest salary. I also have a surprise for you here. I will reveal that towards the end. To get the headcount at an overall level, we can simply use COUNT-A function and select staff and something like employee ID. We should get 260 for this value, and to get an overall average, we can use the average function, staff table salary column. We are going to get the value with a lot of precision, but you can apply currency formatting by pressing Control-Shift-4 and you'll get the value. I'm going to take it down to just no decimal values, and we are looking at 73,878 as the average. Remember, if you are doing this with raw data directly, this number might be different because through the course of this video, we did update the data a little bit. And this one we don't have to calculate because there is no difference from an overall level. The highest salary is maximum of staff table salary column. Again, we're going to get 120,000. We want similar formatting as this cell. So I'll select this cell, click on Format Painter and apply that formatting there. Now let's see all the departments here in alphabetical order. For this, we could use the unique function, unique staff table department. We're going to get all the columns. I thought we are going to get 12, but we are getting 13 because we did add a new department called business growth halfway through the video. So I'm just going to extend this formatting here as well. So we have that. Let's calculate the headcounts. This is where we could use the COUNTIFS function. COUNTIFS staff table department, and the department is in this range B6 to B18, but as this is a spill range, I can simply say B6 hash, and that's going to point to the entire range here. We will get the values for everybody in those departments. For average, we are going to use the AVERAGEIFS function, average of staff table salary column, staff table department, is B6 hash. And we are going to get these values. Let's round them up to no decimal values and apply the currency formatting. Now comes the fun part. I want to calculate how much these values differ from the overall average. So here we want to select this minus that. But we want to do these subtractions for every value here. As D6 itself is a spill range, we can simply say D6 hash minus D3. You don't have to say this as $D $3. When you are using spillable formulas, Excel will automatically stick this reference to D3 as needed. So if you hit enter, you're gonna get all of these values. 79,000 here is 5,827 more than the average there. Let's apply currency formatting on this one as well, and we'll get that. And you can quickly see which departments have more average and which departments are lagging behind. While this red coloring helps, there is also another trick that you could use. You can select this column and apply conditional formatting and use a data bar to quickly see where the values are so far ahead or where they are behind. So I'm going to add a solid data bar, and let's go ahead and customize this by looking at the manage rules and select this rule, edit it, and I'm going to adjust this rule. So instead of automatic to automatic, what I want to do is I want to make sure we can read the bar as well as the number. So first step, what I will do is I will just say show the bar only here and click OK. That's going to give me just the bar. And then I'm going to insert another column here. And in this column, I'll say equal to and then E6 hash. So we're going to get the same values again. And in this range, it also copied the conditional formatting. So I'm going to take out that conditional formatting. So we're only looking at the values like that. I'll take down these values by reducing the font size a little bit and just change the color to that. I also don't want to see the red coloring here. So I'm going to go to format cells, and from currency, I'll just change this to that style of formatting so that it comes up like that. So these numbers are showing up in an adjacent column, and I'll just size this a little bit like that so that we can now see the bars as well as the numbers. Finally, I'll select these two cells and merge and center them so that that comes up nicely up top in the middle. Finally, let's calculate the highest salary for each department. This is nothing but max ifs staff table salary column, staff table department is my B6 hash. We're going to get the maximums for every department. Again, let's apply currency formatting. I'll select this column here, click on Format Painter, and apply that formatting here as well. So there you go, a concise department report that tells you what is happening and shows everything. I did forget a couple of steps. Number one being sorting these departments in alphabetical order. So I'm going to select this unique function and add the sort around it. And like magic, all of these values recalculate now that these departments have changed. Now time for surprise. How would you calculate these values? I want to know what is the median as well as what is the female ratio in each of these departments. What kind of formulas would you use to come up with these numbers here as well as up top there? Go ahead and give it a try. That's going to help you unlock and learn some new techniques with formulas. Just like formulas, Excel also offers another powerful way to analyze the data, and that is called pivot tables. So in this segment of the video, let's understand how to use pivot tables by exploring these 10 analysis themes. We are going to switch track here and use a different type of data for this purpose. We are going to use a made up call center data set for analyzing and using pivot tables of Excel. Along the way, we are also going to uncover some of the amazing and powerful features of Excel like interactive graphs and slicers and dynamic pivot reports. Let's continue our journey. Here are the 10 analysis themes that we are going to attempt using pivot tables. Let's first take a look at the data. Here I have got a call center data set that tells me the call numbers, customer IDs, the customer who is calling us, how long they spoke with us, who is the representative that took the call, the date on which the call came in, how much is the purchase amount, and what is the satisfaction rating. I have the data for year 2023 and we have 1000 call information here. We can use pivot tables to quickly and efficiently analyze this data in Microsoft Excel. I do have a surprise for you here, which I'm going to reveal later in the video. But for now, let's take a look at the analysis themes closely. Our first one is how many calls we are getting by customer. In order to answer something like this, we can quickly set up a pivot table on top of this data and then look at the customer ID and count how many times each ID has appeared. Before you can set up a pivot table, it is a good idea to turn this data into tabular format in Excel. To do this, just select any cell and press Ctrl T, T for table, and click OK to add the table. This is going to apply consistent formatting on the top of data, and you can also see the table design ribbon here to set up more styles, etc. Before we can make a pivot table, I'm going to give this table a name. Right now it is called table 1. I'm going to name this as calls and hit enter to commit to that name. Now you can use this summarize with pivot table button right here on the table design ribbon, or you can also go to the insert ribbon here to find the pivot table options. Let's click on summarize with pivot table. When you do this, it will identify the existing table, the calls table, and it will ask you where do you want this pivot. I'm going to make this in a new worksheet, and later on in this video, we are also going to understand what this will do and how we can use that to build even more powerful pivot tables. For now, let's select new sheets and click on OK. This is going to add a new worksheet and set up the pivot table grid area here. A pivot table is a concise business report that you can create in Microsoft Excel. It might seem a bit weird at the first attempt, but once you make it, it all makes sense. So remember, the thing that we are trying to do right now is how many calls we are getting by customer. So I'm going to go to my sheet 1. And in this area here, we want to see customer IDs go along the screen like this and how many calls we are getting here. So this is where the pivot table fields area comes into picture. This little tab that appears on the right hand side is what we can use to set up the pivot table. There are two important aspects of this screen. One is the field list. This is where all the fields of your table of data will show up. Each field is one column of your data. And then the second is the fields area here, where you can put whatever you want into the relevant aspects of the pivot report. Again, like I said, this all seems a bit weird. So let's first build it and then it all makes sense. So I'm going to take the customer ID, and as I want to see customer IDs go down screen, I'll put this into the rows area here. You can just drag and drop it into the rows area there. And for each customer that we have in our data, we have got 15 customers. Their IDs will be displayed here immediately. We want to see how many calls they're making. We can take the call number and put it into the values area. And Excel is going to count how many calls are coming up. You can see the total is 1000, and this is how the customers are calling. For example, customer 4 has called us 82 times, whereas customer 3 has only called us 50 times. As you can see, creating a pivot table is really like child's play. You just drag and drop things into various parts of the pivot table construction thing here, and then it will create the report for you. Now that you have seen a report, let's go ahead and examine the areas of this pivot table fields thing closely. Like I said earlier, these are the fields of your data, and whatever field you want, you can put it into the rows area. Whatever you put in rows, they will appear along the screen here. You can also put items into the columns area. We're going to do this in the next part of this video. And whatever you put in the values, that is going to be either counted, added, or averaged. Let's take a look at the next example. Our next example is how satisfied are our customers. And we're going to do that in the same pivot table rather than making a new one altogether. So as I'm seeing the count of calls, I also want to see the total satisfaction rating information here. So I'll select the pivot table cell again, and then this pivot table fields thing activates. A quick note of caution here, if you click outside the pivot, you will not be able to access the pivot table fields thing. So this is why you need to click inside and then use this. And once you're looking at the fields list here, you can take another field like satisfaction rating and put it into the values. This is gonna initially sum up the total satisfaction rating values. So for example, customer 1, it says the sum of satisfaction rating is 249. Now that is a ridiculous number. If you look at the data closely, we have got satisfaction rating here that usually goes from 0 all the way up to 5. So ideally what I want is, here I want to see what is the average rating of that customer's satisfaction. So as satisfaction rating is a number, by default pivot will sum it up, but you can right click on this number and you can say summarize values by, and then change the nature of calculation from sum to average. You just have to click on the average and it will change that. So there you go, we'll get the average rating. While I'm happy with this average rating, it also looks a bit ridiculous with 6 decimal points. So let's fix that. You can right click on the number again and go to number format option here. And from here, you can tell Excel how you want all of these numbers to be formatted. So I'm going to select number format and reduce this down to just 1 decimal point and click OK. So now everybody's satisfaction rating is rounded to 1 decimal point, and you can see some 4s, some 3s, and at an overall level, we have got an average of 3.9 satisfaction rating. Let's take a look at the next example. So here I want to look at who are our top 10 customers. And for this, we are also going to understand how to apply filters on top of the pivot table. So this time we are going to make a brand new pivot table. I'll go to the data, select any one cell, and then go to insert and click on pivot table option here. All of these will do the same thing. You can use the pivot table. You can use the pivot from the table design. You can also, if you're not really sure what kind of pivots to make, try out this recommended pivots option, which is a new feature available in Excel 2016 and 365. Let's try out the pivot table option here. So if you click on that, it's going to again identify the table range as calls, and it'll ask you where you want. I'm going to make this into a new worksheet. Click OK. Let's rename this as 1 and 2. And this sheet, I'm going to call it as 3 because here we are going to do the third analysis problem. So here, what I want to do is I want to see our top 10 customers by the amount of business they're doing with us. If you look at the data, apart from the call duration and the date, we also know what is the purchase amount. So for our top 10 analysis, I would like to look at the total amount purchased by each customer and then bring this down to just the top 10 customers. This is really simple. We're going to take the customer ID and put it into the rows area here and take the purchase amount and put it into the values. Initially, you're going to see the total of all the numbers added up here, and they will all look like this. As these are dollar values, it's a good idea to first apply the dollar formatting. So you can right click on this number, go to number format and set this to currency with 0 decimals. So now everything looks nice and a total of $96,000 total value here. And let's say we don't want to see all of these. We are only interested in our top 10 customers. So you can click on this little filter button that shows up top here. And from there, you can go to value filters and select the top 10 filter option. While you're here, you can also try out some of these other things if you're feeling fancy. So before doing top 10, let's try out the greater than option. Let's say I want to look at all the customers who are bringing in more than $7,000 revenue. I can go to value filters greater than and then type the value as 7,000 and click OK, and I'll be able to look at the 4 customers that are bringing in that amount. You'll also see the grand total here reflects that value. Now let's go back to the problem that we were trying to do, which is just the top 10 customers, not the ones that have more than 7,000. So to do that, I'm going to click on this again. First, clear up the filter from this and then go back again, value filters, top 10. And as we are only interested in top 10, you can straight away click OK. And that's going to show you the top 10 customers. Whenever you're looking at top 10 numbers like this, it's a good idea to arrange this report in the descending order of the amount. To do that, you can again right click on these numbers and go to sort and select largest to smallest option so that you can see the customer with the highest amount up top and the 10th most value at the bottom. Let's go to the next one. We also now want to see the top 10 customers for a specific representative. If you look at the data, each call is taken by a specific representative. So if I want to ask the question, who are the top 10 customers for R02? To answer such a thing, we can use the pivot table fields, and there is an option called filters here. If I put a filter there, that's going to filter down the report just to that value. For example, I can take the representative and put it into the filters, and that will be added up top here. And from here, you can select instead of all R02. And when you click OK, you will see who are the top 10 people for R02. Coincidentally, it is the same customer C0005. $2,280. Let's take a look at R04. For R04, it's a different person, C13 with $1,863. You'll also note that as you change these values, the pivot will automatically rearrange the values and sort them in the descending order consistently. So this is why if you apply the sort order, it kind of works all the time, even when your data changes. While I like these kind of filters, these are called report filters by the way, they are a bit clunky to use. So I'm going to show you a different trick to do the same thing, and these are called slicers, and these are one of my most favorite features in Excel. So let's take a look at that. First up, I'm going to delete this report filter. So I'll set this to all. And then I'll take out the representative. To delete a field from pivot table, you can just select it and drag and drop it outside. You'll see that the cursor will have this little X mark next to it. And when you do that, it will go off. You can also, while looking at the field list here, uncheck the pivot. So here there is a checkbox and you can uncheck that. And that will also take out the field from the pivot table. So now let's take a look at another way of setting up this filter. Just right click on the representative and you'll have add as slicer option. This will give you a button kind of a thing with all the 5 representatives. You can hover your mouse and you'll see that you can click on any one of them. So if you now tap on R02, you'll see all the values for that person, R05, R04. This is really cool and it adds that layer of interactivity to your pivot reports. Not only the slicer is interactive, but it also helps you create interactive visuals for your reports. Let's take a quick look at that as well. I'm going to move the slicer here and position it like that. And here I want to see the top 10 customers as a graph. So I'll select any one cell in the pivot and then I'm going to go into insert and click on a column chart. We'll get the column chart for these 10 customers and now see the magic. If I click on a different representative, you'll see the graph updates immediately. So this is how the slicers can help you create interactive visualizations right in Excel. We are going to go more into this topic later on in this video as well as in the follow-up videos of my free data analyst course. For now, let's go to the next one. The fifth one is call duration analysis. Let's go to the data here and you can see that we have got the duration of the call here. Let's just assume these are in seconds. Let's say you want to understand how the call distribution looks like. One quick way to do that is you can insert a pivot. You can go here and insert a pivot. But as we have been adding quite a few pivots, you can also, for example, take any one of these pivots, copy it, Control C and paste it. So I'm going to do that. So copy pasted that pivot. You'll get the same thing, but all the fields and everything will be there. This is a quick way to get a clone of an existing pivot with all the settings and quickly adjust things. So here, what I want to look at is call duration. So I'm going to take out customer ID and some of these other things. Let's leave the count of call number here. If you notice this pivot table right now, the one that we are seeing, this one, it has a little weird structure. There is nothing in this pivot except the count of call number. So when there is nothing, it just tells you what is the total number. So right now it's just telling you there's 1000 calls. What we will do is we'll take the duration and put it into rows and you'll see how many calls have that specific duration. For example, 3 calls had 6 seconds. 1 call has 2 seconds. That is a really short call, but there are lots of longer calls here. So for example, 176, 1 call. I'm just going to assume these are actually in minutes and not in seconds. So given this information, while it does tell you the call duration, it's kind of not really analytical. So when you are looking at this, you may want to, for example, group this and then consider all calls under 10 minutes as one bucket, 10 to 30 minutes as one bucket, 30 to 60 minutes, 60 to 120, like that. That kind of a thing is really easy to do with Excel. You can just right click on any one of these numbers and then you'll have the group option here using which you can create groups. So I'm gonna first pre-select some values 2 to 10, right click and group. That's gonna create a group from 2 to 10. And it also gonna create other kinds of groups where there is no values. So normally when you want to do it like that, you'll need to repeat these steps. So for example, from 10 to 30, we want one group. So I'm going to select up to here and then group that. So you'll have a group 2, which has these values. And then from 30 up to 60, we will create one more group. And from 60 to 120, we'll create one more group. And finally, 120 to all other values, we'll create one group. So this is one way of doing where you are manually grouping items and setting things up. And once you have the group, you can see that pivot actually adds a second duration field, which is kind of the group field, and then set this up in the rows area here. So now that we have got the second duration, I'm going to take out the original duration from the pivot table, and then you can see how many calls are coming. So for example, group 1, the calls under 10 minutes, very few calls happen there. Group 2, 51 calls. Group 4, 524 calls. So most of our calls are between 1 hour to 2 hours, which is quite interesting and really long if you ask me. This is one way of doing it, but there is also another way of doing it. And there is a problem with this kind of a grouping approach. One problem with this grouping approach is if you go to the data, and let's go back here for a second, and I'm going to add the duration as well. And you can see that group 1 has only these values, 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 10. Now, what if we get a call that lasted 9 minutes? You can see that that is not part of group 1's definition right now. So if I go to the data here and change one of these values, I'm going to select this 13 here and make it 9. Just make a note that this is call this one, and once that change is applied, we'll go here. Right now nothing happens, but you can right click on the pivot and then select refresh. This is going to update the calculations for you, and when it is updated, you'll see that the 9 doesn't appear in the group 1. Where did it go? It actually went into its own little group because these group definitions are attached to the ingredients that you had when you set them up. So this is a problem with this kind of a grouping. And this is why I don't really recommend this sort of a grouping. But for a quick ad hoc analysis, this is fine. Let's go back and change this to 13 and come here and refresh the pivot once again. So now our 9 group disappears altogether and we are back to original problem. Like I said, this is a problem and we'll need to fix it. I'm going to introduce a different technique later on in this video and one more technique in the second part of this video. Our next analysis theme is how busy is our call center in 2023. In order to answer this, we'll need to understand how to work with date fields when creating a pivot report. Let's go. So we'll make a new pivot by inserting pivot table here. And in this pivot table, we are now going to use the date of the call feature. So we'll take it and put it into the row label area. And you'll see that as soon as I put a date, Excel automatically groups the date at a monthly level. You'll also see that it adds a few more fields. The kind of fields that are added are slightly different from version of Excel to version of Excel. And you might even see a quarter and year added here. But in my case, it has added day and month apart from the existing date itself. I find that the day itself is kind of useless, but the month value is super helpful. So what we want to do is for each month here, we would like to see how many calls came in. That way, once that number is there, I can see it in a graphical format and understand how busy our call center is throughout the year. So we are going to take the call ID, call number, and then put that into the values. And we'll see how many calls are coming in every month. And you can see that the number is not consistent. It kind of varies a little bit, but the total is 1000. Now let's make this into a graphical format. For that, we can go to the insert ribbon and click on a line chart and add a line graph here to see the call trends. You can see that we have got a slow start of the year with Jan and Feb having about 80 calls, but then it quickly picks up in March, April, May, and then it goes down again and then picks up in October, November. So this is the typical pattern for our call center, and you can look at this and you can understand when the busy periods are for our customers. When we add a date field to the pivot table, Excel also automatically adds this kind of a grouping, and you'll see that there is a little plus button right next to each date. So for example, if I click on this plus button and expand the January, you'll see all the individual data for every day in January. Not only that, even the graph gets updated. So now the entire Jan itself is expanded out with individual details. So one way of understanding all of this is whatever the pivot table is saying, whatever level of detail pivot table has, that is how the pivot chart will behave. I jokingly call this as the pivot table and the pivot chart are married couple. Whatever one says, the other will do. So if I, for example, have a daily information here, that is how my pivot chart is going to look. See what happens the moment I collapse January. Automatically this graph updates. Likewise, if I expand March, I'll have that kind of an expansion for March data here. We can take this behavior and use it to our advantage by, for example, adding a slicer or something else that controls the pivot table and hence controls the chart as well. We have actually done a little bit of that earlier here by looking at representative-wise totals. So when I select a different rep, I'll see their totals. We could do the same for this one as well. We could, for example, right-click on representative, add a slicer, and then I can click on R02 to see their trend, R04 to see their trend. Here is a pro trick as well. If you want to multi-select different representatives, maybe you want to understand how R1 and R4 together are doing, you can hold down Control and select both of them and then see this. If you want to select all the values together, you can click on R01 and drag to select 3 items in a go. Our next analysis is year-to-date sales analysis. And for this purpose, we would like to look at our data and look at the purchase amount and then see how much it adds up over the course of a year. Again, we would like to make a new pivot, but we already have many pivots. So I'm just going to copy this pivot, Control C, and paste it right here. In this pivot, I would like to, instead of seeing count of call number, the amount. So I'm going to take this one out and then put the purchase amount there. So we'll see individual monthly values, and the total is only 59,000. That doesn't look all right. If you remember correctly from earlier, when you clear, we have got a total of 69,000. So what's going on with this pivot? How come it is only showing 59? This is because when you copy paste one pivot to another, you're not just getting a pivot, you're also getting any slicer connections as well. So if you see here, this pivot is connected to that slicer. But because we copy pasted that pivot, even this guy is connected to that slicer. That's why these totals are just for R1, R2, and R3. See what happens when I clear the slicer. If I clear it, right now I'm looking at all the representatives and my total again comes back to 96,000. Here it is 69 because we are only looking at the top 10 customers. But once you include all the customers, it will go up to 96 or whatever that is. All right. So now that you understand the trick behind connecting the same slicer to multiple pivots, let's go ahead and look at how to get the year-to-date totals. By default, each month will only show its value, but you can right click on the number, any number would do, and you can go to the show values as, and from here, you can change the type of calculation. Right now, we are not doing any calculation, but instead what we want to do is we want to do a running total. So this is what I'm going to pick. Right click, show value as running total in. And when you click OK, you're going to see the running total in the month field, and then the values will add up and December will have 96,000. Now that the running total is there, you can see it either in the pivot or you could make a cool little graph, like for example, an area graph, to see how over the course of the year, our total amount has changed. It started slow, but it quickly picked up and we reached up to 96,000 by the end of the year. And the beautiful thing with this graph is it is still linked to that slicer. So if I click on R02, I'll see how the trend is for them. Likewise, R03, R05, you can see that as I click on this, these graphs change. You might be thinking, okay, Chandoo, this is all good, but my year doesn't start on January and end on December. What if I need to end the year at June and then restart it from July? In this case, we will need to first calculate what is called a financial year and then bring that into the data. To do such things, you can go to the data itself and add a column that tells you what financial year it is. Once you add such a column, you can come back and use that column in the pivot table. So let's attempt that. I'm going to go to the data here, and here I'm going to say FY. And in the FY, we want to look at the date and then tell Excel what the financial year is. So the financial year would be 2023 if the date is prior to 30th of June. Anything after that, that is 1st July onwards, it will be 2024. So here we can say if month of the date is less than or equal to 6, that means you're in the first 6 months of the year, then the FY is same as the year of the data. So in this case, year will tell me 2023. Else, it will be year of this plus 1. So here we will have 2023, and the moment we switch over to July, here you can see that it kind of switch overs from 2023 to 2024. This logic will work even when you have more than 1 year's worth of data, because the consistent approach of selecting the date, looking at the month, and then just picking the year of the date or year of the date plus 1. You could do these kind of things here in Excel, or You can also set up an add column logic in Power Query if your data is coming in like that. So now that we have got the FY value here, let's go ahead and use it in the pivot. Let's go to the pivot here, and I want to copy the same thing again, but this time set up a financial year running total. So we'll set it up, and I want to use the FY field, but it is nowhere to be found in the field list. To get the FY field appearing here, we'll need to first refresh the pivot. So if you go to the data ribbon and click on refresh all, that's going to refresh the pivot, and you will now have the FY column here. So I'm going to take the FY and then put it into the row label area. Before doing that, I'm going to take out the days and the date of call values. So it's only just months. That way it looks a lot cleaner in my opinion. And then bring the FY and put it up top. So now we have got 2023 FY, 2024 FY, and then here we will have the values. You can see that the running totals automatically adjust. We'll have the values going from 1000 to 9000 and 1800 to 11,000, and it kind of resets here in the middle because we rolled over to a new financial year. And this thing is still linked to the slicer here. So if we were to put another graph, this time let's go with the column chart, you'll see the running totals neatly have this kind of like two columns going up kind of a structure. And if you change this, for example, clear the filters, you'll have different kind of graphs again. Let's go to the next one. Which days of the week are the busiest? In order to do this kind of analysis, just as we have done FY, we'll need to add day of week column into the pivot table. I'm going to quickly do that, day of week. And we want to see this as spelled out rather than number. So here I'm going to say text of this date and then DDDD. That's going to take the date and turn that into the day of the week name. And you'll see Sundays, Mondays, Tuesdays, like that, all the days spelled out. Let's go ahead and make a pivot. I'll insert pivot table, click OK. And again, the day of the week field won't show up here in the field list because the pivot has not been refreshed. So I'm going to refresh this. And now we will have the day of the week field here. And I'm going to take that and then put that here into the columns. We haven't used the columns option, but it works exactly like rows. Whatever you put in columns will have one column per value here on the screen. So you'll basically have column A for Sunday, B for Monday, like that. Now for each day, I want to see how many calls we are getting. To do that, we are going to take the call number and add that here. And then again, you'll get that kind of values there. Let's also add a representative there so that we can see how many calls each rep is getting on each day of the week. Now, when you have got lots of numbers like this, it's very hard to get the answer, which is which days of the week are busiest for us. So there are a couple of techniques that I normally use to get this. One is we could do a percentage analysis. That is where we will look at a number that is here and then express that as a percentage of the total calls that that representative is getting, so that we could kind of do apples to apples comparison. So for example, you might think 44 is a lot of calls, but all in all, they were getting quite a few calls as well. So maybe they're working as hard as somebody who's getting 28 calls, but getting less number of calls themselves. So to fix that, a percentage analysis really helps. And to do this, you can just select the cell, right click, go to show value as, and then select percentage of row total. So that it will be all percentages, and you'll see each row adds up to 100%. Now that these are percentages, we will be able to see some abnormalities if there are any. Again, when you have got lots of numbers like this, it is very hard to spot if there is some extreme values going on. So one more trick that I picked up along my way of learning pivot tables is using conditional formatting. And doing this is really simple. Just select any one number and then from home ribbon, click on conditional formatting. And I like to use color scale for this kind of a thing. So I'm going to pick color scale, and you can pick a divergent scale, green to red, or one of these other options. Let's go with this one. And when you click OK, you'll only see the color in the first one. But here is the trick. You'll also see this little thing there. Click on it and select the third option from here. This is going to instantly apply that kind of a formatting for all of these numbers. And whichever number has most percentage, that will be the greenest. Likewise, whichever number has the lowest percentage will be the reddest. So for example, here you can see R01 is relatively free on Tuesdays with only 7% of their calls coming in, but they're very busy on Saturdays. Whereas, for example, R02 on the other hand, they are busy on Tuesdays. And this guy here is busy on Thursdays. But in general, we could see, for example, Thursday is kind of lighter workload, whereas a more green appears consistently on Saturday. So if I were to tell my boss which days are the busiest in our call center, I would tell them, looks like Saturday. Saturday is the busiest day. Probably that is when most of our customers are free. So they pick up the phone and give us a call or something like that. How would you do this analysis? Let me know in the comments. Let's go to the next one, which is there a link between call duration and satisfaction rating? So far, the first 8 ones are more specific questions, but now you could see that we are going into a little bit of vague or qualitative kind of an area of analysis where there is no definite black and white answer for these kind of questions, but we want to explore and get a feel of the data. So one thing that I like to do is use pivot tables to again get most of the work done when I'm doing these kind of questions. And then where the pivot tables cannot do it, then bridge the gap with some formulas. So for example, here, is there a link between call duration and satisfaction rating? If you look at the data, the duration has this kind of a very granular level information with every minute being recorded. Likewise, even the satisfaction rating 4.9, 2.9 going to the decimal points. So in order for us to do this analysis effectively, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 2 more columns. One is a duration bucket and the other one is a satisfaction rating rounded up. So it doesn't have these decimal points. It's just 1 to 5 rating. Let's do that quickly. I'm going to insert a few columns. And in the first column here, duration bucket. And this one is basically looking at the duration here. We want to just categorize this into 5 buckets. It's the same way as how we did earlier with this. We have got under 10 minutes, 10 to 30, 30 to 60, 60 to 2 hours, and then 2 hours or more. But rather than just doing manual grouping here, we are going to use formulas to do that grouping. So duration bucket here, we are going to use the ifs function in Excel to do this. Ifs duration is less than or equal to 10, then it will be under 10 mins. Next, if duration is less than or equal to 30, 10 to 30 minutes. If it is under 60, 30 to 60 mins. If the duration is less than or equal to 120, then it is 2 hours. Else, so for else part, we just say true, and then we'll say more than 2 hours. This is going to basically give us a bucketing here. The beautiful thing with this is if and when our data changes or we have new data, it automatically again tags the call into the right bucket. Whereas as I shown you earlier, this kind of a grouping doesn't really hold up when you have a new call that is not part of any of the existing values. So this is a duration bucket. If you have data in Excel, you can use formulas. If you have got data coming in from SQL Server or a web page or a SharePoint folder, then you could do this in the Power Query as well. The next one that we want to do is satisfaction rating. Again, we want to round it up. So rating rounded, and this one is going to be basically round, take the rating value and just round it to 0 decimal places. So we'll have the rating of 0 to 5. It's surprising that some people have 0 rating, but let's just go with that for now. So now that these two columns are there, we want to use that and then kind of explore if there is any kind of interesting patterns emerging when I look at duration and the satisfaction rating. To do that, we'll just insert a pivot table. And in this pivot table here, we're going to put the duration bucket and the satisfaction rating into the report. First, we need to refresh it so we can see those fields. And now I can see the duration bucket and rating rounded fields. I'm going to take duration bucket and put it into rows and rating rounded into columns. So now that that is there, let's just see how many calls we are getting in each of these combinations, and you'll start to see some interesting patterns emerging. I'm going to expand these things out so that we could kind of observe this closely. And before we could even read this, it kind of looks lopsided. That's because if you look carefully at the ordering here, it kind of shows 1 to 2 hours up top and then under 10 minutes at the bottom, 10 to 30, 30 to 40, and then more than 2 hours. So it's kind of like jumbled. And if you're thinking, why is it like that? It's because it is sorting this list in alphabetical order. While that might work for names or cities or something, for some ad hoc items like this, that's not a good idea. So here is a trick that you could use to rearrange items in the pivot table. I want under 10 minutes to show up top. So I'll click on under 10 minutes. And while looking at the cell, if you place your cursor on the border of the cell, any border, you'll see that it turns into this black color arrows cursor. Click and drag it now. Likewise, this one should be next. And then this one. And then we have 1 to 2 hours like that. So with this, you'll now start to see this kind of like a very weird triangular pattern appearing. And that should tell us a little bit more of what is happening in this data. And at this point, you can apply conditional formatting to kind of really bring out the numbers quickly. So we're going to select the first conditional formatting, dark green to light green option, and then apply it all over. And then you can see what is happening. So the sweet spot seemed to be here, this area there, where if the calls are between 1 to 2 hours, then the customers seem to be kind of rating us highly there. A lot of calls are happening, and then that is where the satisfaction seems to peak. But again, we have very few calls, like under 10 minutes, only 9 calls. So it's not fair to compare things like that. So you may want to do a percentage based analysis. And again, you could do this by right clicking at a row level. And then let's take a closer look at that. So when I do this, you can see that there is no definite pattern as such. In general, most of the customers are very happy with that. That's why we have kind of like more 4s and 5s. Very few customers here. And we could kind of see there is no definite pattern. If anything, the shorter the calls are, the more number of people are satisfied and just leaving. Whereas the longer calls have 40 and 30 there, whereas shorter calls have 50 and 55 there. So maybe that could be one conclusion. Maybe we can tell our agents, keep it quick, keep it to the point so that the customer can finish the call and maybe go on and do what they have to do. But that is one way of looking at this data. Do keep in mind that the numbers and everything here are randomly made up. So there is actually no real pattern in the data. It's just all random noise. But you could use the pivot tables and conditional formatting and the value settings to really dig deep and look at your data like this. And here is a little challenge for you. If you want, you can also create a scatter graph to explore this data. As our data is randomly made up, I'm not bothering with that, but you can try it out with your numbers to see if there is any kind of exhibited relationships. And if there is, then you could do some hypothesis testing to actually find out if this is true and establish that as a case for your scenarios. Let's go to the last one, which is, should we hire extra people in any specific months? This kind of goes back to what we did earlier with our monthly call trend information here. You can see that this is how it looks, and we do have a couple of peaks. So looking back at this, I could kind of tell that as we are getting lots of calls in February to April, maybe we should have in the months of March, April, and May, someone coming in like a temporary staff, or someone else from another department could also be part of the call center team for that months, so that they can better handle the workloads. But then comes the question of who should we hire to support? So for example, do we hire in general, or should we bring in somebody to support R03 or R04? So let's do that kind of analysis. Again, I'm gonna insert a pivot table. And here I want to see representatives and duration too, which is, month there. And then let's take a look at the calls. This is how the calls are. And I want to see which reps have most workload throughout the year, so that then we could bring in that extra person and support them. Well, all the numbers are there. They're kind of hard to spot. And this is again where I would normally use conditional formatting and set up a data bar, and let's extend that. And you can quickly see, for example, there's a couple of 40s here for R02. So this kind of tells me that maybe R02 could use a little bit of help in the month of March and April, when they have almost twice the number of calls than they normally would. So 19 in January and double the number of calls in March and April. Likewise, maybe R03 could use some help here in the month of October. So if I am going to decide and get somebody to help us, I would say bring in extra help here for supporting R02, and then bring in here to support R03. So that could be one way of looking at it. And again, as this data is completely randomly made up, I wouldn't really go and read too much into it, but this sort of analysis is easy to do once you start using pivot tables and setting up with your data. Let's conclude all of this with a couple of homework exercises for you. Here I have listed them. The first one is time wasters. Which customers call most but buy least? Do we even have any time wasters in our data? If so, who are they, and who are the ones that just call us but never really do a lot of transaction with us? And then the second one is rep training. Which reps could use satisfaction training program? So let's say you want to look at the satisfaction ratings at a rep level, and then see if there is anybody who could use a little bit of help. And this could be done at an overall level, or maybe you can see the trend of their satisfaction. And if somebody's satisfaction is consistently dropping over the period of time, maybe that could be a signal for you to say that they could use a little bit of training so that they can take their calls better. So how would you do this kind of analysis with pivot tables? Give it a go, build that out, and tell me in the comments how you will attempt those things. Now that we have covered many of the powerful and useful Excel concepts like Power Query, Excel formulas, tables, Excel pivot tables, and Excel charts, let's put everything together to come up with a beautiful interactive portfolio project like this. This is what we are going to build. It is a call center performance dashboard. This dashboard combines many valuable and practical Excel concepts like Power Pivot, slicers, interactive charts, and conditional formatting. Let me do a quick demo of this. This is a dynamic report that shows me what is happening across our call center. Right now I have highlighted R01, but I can select a different representative and I can see how things are for that particular person. Whoever I select, I'll also see their picture along with a quick summary underneath. You can also multi-select items and understand how things are happening for multiple representatives. whatever you select, you will see up top here the overall calls and the selected calls underneath. So for example, out of 1000 calls, 614 came from R01, 2 and 3. Whichever representative I select, they are clearly highlighted in the calls and amounts graph, as well as their column is highlighted in the customer table here by region. This is a super helpful and really simple portfolio project that showcases what you're capable of building using Excel. So let's go and build this from scratch using the blank workbook. I have provided you a copy of this blank workbook as well as the completed file, and use this blank workbook to build this whole thing on your own. Let's start by doing a quick review of this data. It is a call center data. We have got call number in the first column, who is the customer, how long they spoke with us, who is the representative that took the call, the date, purchase amount of that call, what is the satisfaction rating, and some of these other columns that we calculated in the previous lessons. These are simple formulas that are used to calculate financial year, day of the week, duration bucketing, and rounded value of the rating. Apart from this data, I have also added another data set here, which is my customer data. Here for each customer, I know what is their gender, how old they are, and what city they are from. As you can see here, we operate out of 3 different cities. All our customers are from Columbus, Cincinnati, and Cleveland. The first thing that I want to explain is the Assets tab. This is where I have put some icons and images that we are going to use later on to prettify our dashboard. These images are downloaded from the stock image option of Excel. So these are not real people images, they are just stock pictures. The first thing that we are going to do is set up a color theme and font choice for our dashboard. This is really important and an early step that you should do so that everything else becomes easier later on. For this, I'm going to go into the page layout ribbon and choose the colors, and from the default office theme here, I'm going to select the slipstream option underneath, and you'll see that as soon as I select, all the colors change in my tables as well. This is fine. And for the fonts, I'm going to select the choice of Aptos Extra Bold and Aptos. These are new fonts that Microsoft added to Excel 365 recently. If you don't have them, just use any fonts, that is still fine. You can customize the fonts by using this button here, customize the fonts, and select the heading font as well as the body font. This way, you don't have to make individual choices when you're setting up titles or body text in the dashboard. You just use this and that automatically trickles down into the report. So now that the color scheme and font choices are made, let's add a tab, and this tab is going to be our customer center report. In here, I'll make the first 2 columns narrow, and I'm going to select a big enough range. Let's just select up to this, and we are going to fill up a dull gray color like this. This is where our report is going to sit. And now in order to calculate all of the items in the report, we need to set up a bunch of pivot tables. So we'll go here to the data tab and select the calls table. You can select just any one cell and go to insert and click on the pivot table. That's right. All the calculations and analysis for our dashboard is going to be generated through the pivot tables, and we are going to use a very minimal amount of formulas to drive the process. So we'll click on the pivot table, and we are going to make one important change at this point. We are going to say add this data to the data model. Previously, we have not used this feature, but this feature helps us take this call data and combine it with the customer data that is further on the screen. So let's select this, and we are going to add it to a new worksheet. Okay. This is going to introduce a new sheet. I'm going to rename this as pivots. And here we are going to set up all the calculations. Before we do any calculations, we do need to combine this data with the customer data that is here. So if you notice, this table is called customers and this table is called calls. You can see the name here in the corner. And what we will do is we'll combine these two tables on the customer ID column. So you can do this from the pivot table itself. You can go to the Analyze ribbon and click on the relationships and make a new relationship between the calls table customer ID and customers table customer ID. And when you close this screen, you have now connected both of these tables, and you can take the data from either table and see that in the pivot report. The process of using pivot tables is same whether you are working off one table or multiple tables. But once you have two tables, you can see that the field list here changes, and now you have active and all tables option. If you go to the all tables, you'll see that both of your tables are listed for you here. So you can take data, some data from calls and some data from customers, and combine that to generate a complex business report. So that's what we are going to do. For our dashboard, we need a overall summary of the business, what is happening across the board. So that's the first pivot that we are going to make. You can expand the calls table and you'll see that most of the information is here rather than dragging the items into the values directly. So for example, if I want to see the total amount, I can select the purchase amount and put it into values, and then I can see what is that amount here directly. This is how we have done pivot tables in the previous video. This time I'm going to show you a different technique which involves using the Power Pivot and DAX features of Excel. So I'll take this out and right click on the calls table here, and you'll see that there is now an add measure option. This is one of those additional features that get activated when you are using relationships and data model feature of Excel pivot tables. That is what, when we were inserting the pivot table, by clicking this checkbox, we are enabling. So let's add this measure, and this measure I'm going to call this as call count. And here we can use a formula, count rows of the calls table, to count how many rows are there. As each row is one call, it just tells us how many total calls are there. This language here is the DAX language, data analysis expressions language. And using this, you can build calculations on top of your data and then see those calculations inside pivot tables. Another advantage of using this kind of a notation is that while creating this itself, you can tell how the number should be formatted. So you can set this to number, say that it should be a whole number with 1000 separator, and click OK. You'll see that this will add a call count measure to the table. This is not like a physical column in the table. This is a calculation on top of the table. So now if I select this, I'll see the call count as 1000, but you'll also see that it is having that number formatting applied as well. Let's calculate the total amount as well. Add measure. And this time we are going to use the sum function, sum of calls table purchase amount column. And this we're going to set it as currency. We don't need any decimal points on that, and click OK. And again, you'll have the total amount. You can add that to see $96,623. Next up, we want to calculate the total duration. And this is sum of the calls table duration column. We'll do two more measures. One is the average rating, and use the average of calls satisfaction rating column. And we can see that here. I'm going to add one more measure, and this is the number of happy callers, or how many calls have 5-star rating. So this is nothing but, if you look at the data, every call has a satisfaction rating, and we have rounded that to a 6-point scale from 0 to 5. And I just want to count how many 5s are there in this data. So in a way, this is nothing but counting the calls where the rating rounded is 5. So let's add this measure, and we'll call this as 5-star calls. And here we can use a special function called calculate call count, comma, rating rounded is equal to 5. What this does is it calculates the call count by adding an extra filter context by saying that get me the count of calls only if the rating rounded is 5. So that's what calculate does. It kind of alters the calculation logic by introducing extra filters through these options at the end of it. Let's do this as a number as well and add that. And let's add that, and you can see that out of 1000 calls, 307 are 5-star calls or happy callers. So this is my overall business summary, and it tells me what is happening across the board. So I'll go to the pivot table analyze ribbon, and you'll see that this pivot table is named pivot table 1 here. I'm going to rename this as summary pivot. You can just select here and do that. And I'll copy this pivot, Control C, and paste it once again. And this time I'll name this as rep pivot. The purpose of this second pivot is I want to see what those numbers are if I select a specific representative. For that purpose, I'm going to expand the calls table, and while activating the second pivot, right click on the representative and add it as a slicer. So now I have got a slicer, and this slicer is only linked to this pivot table. So it's not linked to the main one, just the rep one. You can test this by selecting R02, and you'll see that only these numbers change. So now I have got an overall summary, and whatever rep I select, I know what the numbers are for that person as well. We can take all of these numbers and plug them into the dashboard now. So let's go here and start putting together our report. For our report, we are going to use some shapes to lay down the important numbers. We'll leave first few rows blank so that we can fill that up with useful headers and other stuff later on. So I'll go to, for example, row number 4 here and insert a rectangle shape. And you can move this around. If you hold down the Alt key on your keyboard, it snaps to the cell borders around there. So let's make it that big. And I'm going to fill up with this nice brick color here. Let's take out the outline from this, and let's go to the shape effects, shadow, and add a drop shadow effect. You can press Ctrl 1 to open the format shape, and from here enhance the shadow a bit. I'm going to go with 50% and blur it by 20 points and make it 10 points distance. So you'll get this kind of a look here. And that's going to be our tile that shows how many calls are there. And once we set it up, we can kind of copy paste this for rest of the things. So in this, I'll select this and then select the formula bar here and then say equal to. This is how I can tell Excel that I want to have in this a value from my pivot. So once you click on the formula bar and then say equal to, you can navigate to the pivots and then point to the 1000 value. Make sure that when you do this, it says pivots table and A4 or something. If it is saying get pivot data, I'll tell you how to fix that in a second. When you hit enter, you'll see that 1000 comes through here. Now, like I was saying, there is a problem with many pivot tables. By default, when you set up a pivot table, Excel has an option here in the pivot table options. If you expand the options, you'll see that this generate get pivot data is checked by default. What it means is, I'll show you what that does. I'll enable this and let's go back here, and this time let's say equal to pivots and point to it. So now you can see that when I point, it's not pointing to the A4 cell. It's actually giving me a get pivot data function that generates the value. This is fine. It's just that the boxes don't like get pivot data. So you'll get an error like this. So this is why you need to disable that. To disable this, you can just go to the options and uncheck generate get pivot data. This is a one-time step. Once you do it for this pivot, it's kind of turned off across the board. So you don't have to worry about this going on. So now that that is done, you can see that this is actually showing me A4 value. I'm gonna center align this and let's select our heading font, which is Aptos Extra Bold, and make it like that, and change it to white color so it kind of easy to read this. So that is 1000 calls, and we also want to say that information calls up top. So for this I can insert a text box. I'm going to draw a small text box up top and move it, and in this text box I'm going to type the words calls. Again, we're using the shape format to fill it up with no outline, no fill, and we'll make it a dull shade of white. And I think we can go with the same extra bold option for that as well. So that is the calls, that is the number. Let's also bring in the icon. We have got some icons in the assets tab here. This telephone icon is perfect icon for calls. So I'm going to copy this, go here and paste it and move it. I'm just going to rotate it a little bit and size it small enough so that it kind of goes into the corner. And finally, using the graphics format, I'm going to format it in a dull color of the same background color as that box so that we can see the calls here, that icon, and then the number. Now underneath this number, I want to show the number of calls that corresponds to the representative that we have selected. Remember, here I have got a slicer and we can see this 218. So let's add one more text box, and this text box goes under here, and this text box is equal to this value. Again, we are going to center align these values, no outline, no fill, and just change it to a color like that. So that looks good. You may want to adjust the alignment of these things to suit your needs. But once you have one of them ready, you can copy all of these and paste it 5 times for the remaining bits. So let's do that quickly. To select all of these items in one go, you can kind of hold shift and select them, but this is a bit annoying. So here is a trick that I normally use when building dashboards. I go to the home ribbon and look at find and select, and here is a tool called select objects. When you click on that, your mouse cursor changes to a regular pointer and you can kind of drag around the whole thing to select all of the items. So once you select all of them, you can Control C to copy and press escape and Control V to paste to get all the 5 boxes. The next job is to change all of these words. This is really simple. You can just start typing where the words are typed and where the values are. From A, this becomes B4. Don't worry about the formatting. We can fix that later. So now that all the values are there, let's also change these icons. This is a really simple process. You can go to the assets tab, select the second icon. So for example, for amount, this is the icon. I'm going to Control C to copy that. Come here, right click on this icon, change graphic from clipboard. So that's going to replace that. We'll need to adjust the color. We'll do that in a second. Let's do this for duration as well. And let's adjust these colors quickly. I'm going to fix the rotation as well for some of them. We don't need the rotation for everything. And to fix the font issues, you can select the first box which has the correct formatting. Double click on the format painter and just select all of these items. Now when I do that, I can see that some of the numbers are getting cropped out. So maybe these needs to be a little bit wider or the font needs to be smaller. I'm going to go with the second option, which is reducing the font size. And let's make this 24 points. That'll do. And for the bottom ones, again, we can just select them and either use format painter or change the color from here. So that makes the first part of the dashboard ready. Let's test this out. I'm going to go into the pivots and cut this slicer, Control X, place it here. You might get a warning. This is fine. And now let's test this out. If I select a different representative, I can see all of these numbers change. I can also multi-select by clicking and dragging, or I can use Control and select different representatives. Whoever I select, I'll see their number of calls, amounts, durations, ratings, and how many happy callers they had. Let's go ahead and build some of these graphs now. Just to give you a reminder, this is what we are trying to build. So as you can see here, we have got some trend graphs that tell me how many calls have come through over the course of 2023 and a breakdown of the pattern on weekdays. So let's first create this, but keep in mind that all of these graphs are interacting with the slicer that is here. So we'll need to set up the slicer connectivity and set up all the customizations as needed. I'm going to go to the pivots here and let's create another pivot. This pivot needs to interact with the slicer and tell us how calls have come through over the course of year. So instead of creating a brand new pivot from the data and then linking it to the slicer, we can copy an existing pivot. This pivot, for example, is interacting with the slicer, and I'm going to Control C to copy and paste it here, Control V. And now we can just change the items in this pivot so that whatever new items you put, they will all be still connected to the slicer. So let's go to the pivot fields here and I'm gonna take out everything. And in this pivot, we would like to see what is happening by the call date. So we'll take the date of call and put it into the rows area. The first time you put a date into the pivot table fields, it's automatically going to group the date by month or quarter or year as well, depending on how much data you have. In this case, the data is only for 1 year, so it automatically grouped that by month, and within the month you have got individual days. This is perfect. I can just see this information as it is. And for each date, I want to see how many calls have come through. So we're going to take our call count measure that we created earlier and put that into the values, and we will get the call count. Notice that this adds up to 575, which is what this number is, because in our report, we are currently highlighting R1, R4, and R5. For example, if I were to select now just R2 alone, you'll see that 218 is the calls, and in my pivot, the date breakdown will also be for that 218. So let's create a graph from this. To make a pivot graph, you can just select any one cell and then go to insert, and I'm going to insert a line chart with markers. So we'll get this. Now for the purpose of our dashboard, what I want is I don't want just a line, but I also want to have a shaded area underneath. To get this, we are going to use a simple trick on the line chart. We'll move this line chart here, and in this pivot, I'm going to add call count again. So it's going to have 2 call count values, and when you update the pivot, this chart will also update. Now it has 2 lines. It's just that the lines overlap, so we can't really see them. You can see that when I move around, it will show me call count and call count 2, both of these lines perfectly overlapping. Now I'll right click on the line and go to change series chart type. And for the second call count, I'm going to change that to an area. So we now have an area along with the line as the chart. This is what I wanted. I'm going to cut this chart, Control X, go to the dashboard and paste it here. Let's make this column narrow enough. And that is my chart. My slicer is behind. I'm going to move the slicer there. And again, you can hold down the Alt key to get perfect alignment. And once this is done, let's just adjust the height and select this chart. Let's get rid of some of the chart junk that is there. For example, we don't need any of these things. All of these are useless. Likewise, this legend is also useless. We had to have 2 of them to get both line and area, but we don't need that. And we also don't need this plus minus buttons. So to take out all of these things, select the pivot chart and go to pivot analyze and turn off the field buttons from the graph. This is going to take out all of these buttons out of the graph. So now that looks clean, and using this plus button, I'm going to uncheck legend. So that's gone as well. And let's add a chart title and click on that. Let's move the chart title here. We're going to add the chart title in a minute, but first let's apply some formatting. So I'm going to select this area and press Ctrl 1 to open the format data series options here. I'll move this here so we can actually see everything together. And let's select this area, go to the fill options and select gradient fill. For my calls, I'm going to use the same brick color that we are using for these boxes. So here in this gradient, I will clean it up and select only 2 color gradient. And the first color would be something like that. And the second color is the darker version. And I'm going to flip this so that the darker color is up top. And for the bottom one, we're going to make it 50% transparent. So you can kind of get like that sort of a faded look. And once that is done, let's select these lines. And for the line, I'm going to change the line color to the same brick color and switch to the marker options. The marker is circle. I'll make it 7 points and fill the marker with the white color. And for the marker border, I'm gonna set it to solid line and set this dark, and let's make it 2 points. So what we are going for is this sort of a look. The markers should stand out with white color inside them and then the black color as the marker. And now we can see that, and let's test this out. If I select a different representative, I should see their call patterns. And when I clear the slicer, I can see the overall picture as well. That works beautifully. Now let's add another chart here that tells me what is the weekly trend. We'll need to add the title as well. We'll do that at the end. So let's go back here and let's copy this and paste once again here. And this time we're going to take out these things and the call counts as well, so that we have an empty pivot table. And in this pivot, expand the calls table and select the day of week field. This has all the days of week, and let's add the call count. Now let's insert a bar chart, and we'll get this bar chart. I'll make it small so we can actually see everything together. And you can see the problem here. There's a couple of problems. One is this weekdays are kind of out of order. If you're wondering what is going on here, they're actually in the alphabetical order of reverse. So W is up top and F, the first letter, is at the bottom. So we don't want the alphabetical order. So we can go here, and if you set this to A to Z, you'll see that it now sets it from Sunday to Saturday. This is perfect for us. But in the chart, it still comes wrong. It has Saturday up top, Sunday at the bottom. So to fix the problem with the chart, you can select this axis and Control-1 to open the formatting. And from here, use the categories in reverse order. What this does is it takes these items here and it kind of flips them around. So whatever is at the bottom, that'll go to the top, and whatever is at the top, that'll come to the bottom. So let's just do that, and we'll now have the correct option. At this point, the chart is ready. I'm going to cut it, Control X, and paste it here in the report. Now for this, again, we are going to follow the same thing. We are going to disable the field buttons and the legend, as well as axis and titles and grid lines as well. And select these lines, Control-1 to open the formatting options. And from the format here, I'm going to adjust the gap width to 25% so that the lines are nice and thick. And we'll select these columns or bars and go to the format and fill it with a solid color that is kind of like that. And let's add data label now. The label comes outside. Let's change the label color. Okay, that color is fine. And let's move this right next to this and kind of adjust the size. I forgot to put the horizontal or vertical axis. I'm just going to turn that on. Yeah, that's perfect. And let's move this slightly inside like that. And while keeping the chart selected, go to the design or format and send it to the back. So it kind of peeks behind this chart. So there is our trend and the weekly trend as well for any representative. Right now we have not selected anyone, so it's showing me all the 1000 calls. But if I select R02 or R03, I can see what is happening at an individual weekday level as well as the overall time period. Let's add the title now. Let's compare with the final look. In the final workbook, I think I went with a orange color rather than the brick color, but other than that, everything looks good. Next, we want to create this particular one. This is showing two graphs. One is the calls one and another one is amount one, along with whatever rep that you have currently selected is highlighted in a different color. Underneath this, we also want to show what is happening for the currently selected rep, their picture, and some information about this. So we are going to do this in two chunks. First one is we will finish this graph, and then towards the end of the process, we are going to add these picture and other things. Let's go. For this, we need more pivots, and let's come here and add those pivots. Before we add them, let's give these pivots some names. So I'll select one of these cells, go to Analyze ribbon and pivot table 3. This we are going to name this as monthly trend, and this one is weekday trend. Let's create more pivots. This time I'm going to create a pivot from scratch just so that you can understand the process of how to link the slicer after you have set up the pivot table. So we'll add a pivot table here. You can select a blank cell and go to Insert Pivot Table and use the third option from Data Model option. But if you don't see that because you're running an older version of Excel or whatever, you could also go back to the data, select Pivot Table, and make sure that you check this and give the location as the cell in the pivots page. So let's do it like that. Existing, and I'm going to point to this cell here. This is going to add one more pivot, but it will still be connected to the same data model, but not to the slicers. That we will have to do it later. Make a note of this pivot. It's saying pivot table 5. I want to call this as reps pivot. And here we want to see the representative. And for each representative, I want to know what is the call count and what is the total amount. So we'll get this information. Unfortunately, we can't make a graph from this because if I want to create a graph like this, this is actually two graphs. This is one and that is another. And we are not able to kind of create such a thing with pivot charts. If I go here and I want to just get information out of this alone and insert a 2D bar, you'll see that it doesn't really select the calls. It has actually selected both the amount and the calls, and it has put them in the same scale. So this is the problem with pivot charts. So what we are going to do is we are going to play a trick here. We are going to use the pivot to do the calculation, but we are going to use a outside range here to create the chart. And the chart has additional trickery as well because we have to highlight the currently selected person. So this pivot, again, remember it's called reps pivot, is going to show me everybody's information. It's not going to have filtering on it through the slicer. And once this pivot is set up outside here, I'm going to say for graph and simply say equal to and grab all of these 5 cells. So everything comes here. A quick note here, if you are using an older version of Excel, you won't be able to do it like this. You'll have to do just this one and then drag like that. So here we have got the data, and now the data is outside. I can just select this alone and insert a 2D bar. You'll see that this has no problem. When you select a range and make a chart, it works. But when you select a range inside a pivot table, it wants to create the graph for the whole thing, not just the selected items. So this is the first one, and we want to have one more, but first let's fix the axis here. Select the axis, Control 1, and then use the categories in reverse order so they appear in the same order as per my data. This is good. Now Let's move this here. And again, we'll select these two. You can hold down Control and select them and insert one more graph. You could do it like this. Alternatively, what you can also do is, because we have already set up one, I'm going to copy this, Control C and Control V to paste it. So we have got the second graph. And in this one we are going to leave it to the calls. This one here, I'll select the range and you'll see that it highlights the values here. When you click on the bars, this range gets highlighted. And what we will do is place the cursor on the edge and drag and move it to the second one, so that we have got both of these now. I notice one additional problem with this. It actually starts the axis at 160. That's why it looks like there is too much variation going on. What I'll do is I'll select this axis, press Ctrl 1 to format and make sure that the minimum is set to 0. Let's do this for this one as well. All right, so this is done. I'm gonna take out these titles and axis also I'll take out. In fact, we're gonna have to do a lot of formatting. And this one will set the gap width to 25% and change the color to this color. Again, we'll do the same for the second graph. We should have actually done all of this before copying, but that's done. And now let's add data labels here. Data labels. So the data labels come up. I'm going to apply some formatting. I'll select these cells, press Ctrl 1 to format. And we can apply currency formatting, but as you can see, the values are in 18,000, 20,000 like that. So I want to show it in thousands of dollars. For this, we can use a custom format code and just set $hash, comma, hash, hash, and then one more comma, dot, 0, and then within double quotes, K. This is going to basically round up that number to thousands with one decimal point and then show that as a label. This makes it look a bit easier on the eyes when you show it in the dashboard. All right, so this is done, but we are still not done. There is some more work to be done, which is whatever representative I select, I want their bar to be in a different color. So to achieve that, I'm going to move all of these graphs further and let's add some titles to our data here. This is my rep calls amount, and then we'll add two more values called cell calls, cell amount. The purpose of this is to show me the call value and the amount value for the representative that I currently selected. So for example, right now we are looking at R03 here. If I come here, what I want is I want these values to go here as well. So 207 and 20.9. Everything else can be blanked out. So once that is there, then we can get the highlighting mechanism going on in the chart. To make it happen, we need to know what is selected by the slicer. So underneath here, I'm going to insert one more pivot. This time I'm going to use the from data model option. And in this pivot, I will put the representative. It's going to show all the 5 representatives. This is because right now this pivot is not connected to the slicer. So let's select any cell here and give this pivot a name from the pivot table name area here. It's currently pivot table 6. I'm going to name this as selected rep pivot. And I'll come here, right click on this slicer and use the report connections to see what reports it is currently connected to. So currently it is connected to monthly trend, rep pivot, and weekly trend. I'm gonna also connect it to selected rep 1. At this point, if I go here, you'll see that this is gonna show me R03. I'm gonna turn off grand totals for this. So whatever rep I select, that's gonna be showing up in the cell A66. This is the address. So if I select R03, which is what we have done here, that's what this will say. If I select R1, this cell will say R1. If I select multiple people, then it's going to show me all the multiple people. But we will only look at the first such person. So if I multi-select, it's going to highlight just the very first one. This keeps it easy for us. And here we'll say selected rep, and this is equal to, and we'll point to this cell. So whatever I select, that's going to come up here. If I select multiple, then the very first person will come up. For the sake of simplicity, we'll just keep selection to one item at a time. So R02 is currently selected. I'll see that here. And then here I can simply say if this representative is equal to that, then I want the calls. Otherwise, I want NA. And you can drag this down. You'll see that if it is R02, only that value comes up, 218. Everybody else gets NA. Note that here we are writing formulas in cells and dragging. But if you notice, this is actually an entire spill range. So you may want to write a spillable formula here directly. As in our case, we only have 5 representatives. It's not a big issue. So I'm not bothering with that. We'll do the same for this as well. If this is equal to that, and we'll make sure that is locked, then this value else NA. Again, fill this down and you'll get the thing. So now that these values are there, we'll select the first chart, right click, select data, and add another series. The series name is selected calls, and the values are here. Okay, so now you'll see that for the currently selected rep, it has an extra item here. Everybody else has NA, so we don't even see that. Now what we want is, we don't want 2 bars, we want the bar color itself to change. So this is achieved by a technique called overlapping. This is where we take this thing and overlap it perfectly on top of that. And because of overlapping, it looks like the color is changing, but reality is there's 2 of them, one sitting on top of another. To do this, we'll just select the blue colored one or the new one, press Ctrl 1 to format, and from the formatting options here, you can use the series overlapping option to adjust the overlap. So if I do a 100% overlap, you'll see that this one goes and sits on top of that, and it gets that kind of a color changing effect. Now let's change this blue color. We can go here and change this to that color. And while we are there, you may want to try gradient. I like the gradient, that it adds a little bit of depth. So I'm going to use the gradient option and select this style of gradient. And let's do the same for here. Right click, select data, add selected amount, and that is the data. Let's apply 100% overlap, and let's select the color. Again, we're going to use gradient. This time we're going to use the brick color. For the amounts, we are going to take out the axis value because it's the same axis, so we don't need that repeated twice. And now our graphs are done. I'm going to Control X them and go back here and paste them here. And let's select the graphs, and I'm going to go to the format and make sure that there is no outline. So once you take out the outlines, it looks like they're all one happy family, and you can insert a rectangle, place it here, and fill it up with white color and set the outline to be that, and send it back. So now you have got an outline as well, and I'm gonna just make sure that there is no fill color in the charts so that we can actually use the background box to get that fill color. And for this slicer, I'm gonna move it slightly inside and send it back. I forgot we need to have titles, so let's add title here, chart title, and this one is calls, and let's add title for this guy as well. That looks great. I can select a different rep and I'll be able to see that highlighted in the graph, and you can see all of these things are also changing nicely. How awesome is this? We do need to adjust some of the settings for the slicer. If you see, the slicer color is in the blue color, whereas all of these highlighting is in the orange or red family. So let's fix this formatting issue for the slicer. You can select the slicer, go to the slicer formatting here, and you'll see that there are different themes that you can select. So for example, you can select this, and that kind of suits what we want, but I want to tone down the unhighlighted colors. So we'll select this and use this as a base style, and then right click on it and then duplicate it to create a duplicate style. And we are going to modify this. First up, we are going to start with whole slicer, go to format, select the border, and instead of this orange border, I'm gonna set this to that border so that it has the same kind of border color as rest of my elements on the dashboard. Next up, we are gonna use unselected item with the data. Selected item with data is fine. It kind of is looking exactly how I want. Unselected item with data, we'll format it and we're gonna fill color to that. And I'm gonna go to the selected item with data here, quickly make sure that the font is bold and click OK. So now we have created a new style. Let's apply that. You can see that currently this is the style that we are using. So while keeping the slicer selected, click on this style and there is our new style. If you want, you can tone it down even more. This is the style that I have used in this report. You can see the colors are a little bit more mellowed down here, except for the one that we are selecting. But that looks good. Now let's add the remaining bits, and when we are done, we are going to bring in the picture and other stuff here. Next, we are going to create these graphs that tell us what's happening at a customer level. So this graph here tells me how many female versus male callers are there between various cities. So we've got Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Columbus, and this is how that picture looks like. And this is the overall rating distribution of the currently selected rep. I think of all the graphs in this page, only this one is not connected to the slicer. So there's no connection here. Everything else is connected. So if you see, when I select something, this one doesn't really change. We're going to keep it like that. And for this, we are going to keep the connection to the slicer active. So let's go ahead and build these two. We'll come here, add one more pivot. And this pivot here, this one doesn't need to be connected to the rep slicer. So we're going to directly insert a pivot from the data model. And in this pivot, we'll just add customers, city, and gender. So we'll see both the 3 cities and female and male. And let's add the call count as the measure. So here you can see the power of that data model, values from both tables coming. The value of this city and the gender are coming from the customer table, whereas this call count is coming from the calls table. Once this is there, we can go to insert and add a 100% stacked graph that shows me male versus female distribution. Female is under and male is above this here. I'm going to cut this graph, paste it here, and let's adjust the size of this. And let's quickly format this. Again, turn off the field buttons, turn off the legend, and select this, go to format and make sure the gap width is 25%. And let's add data labels. And I'm gonna take out the vertical axis as well as the grid lines. That looks like that. Let's adjust the formatting a little bit. I'm going to select the female series and go to format and use the brick color for that. And for the male series, I'm going to use this green color. And I'll select these labels and change the shape to a rounded rectangle. And go to the fill color here and set it to solid color, but make it 50% transparent. Let's do the same for the female as well. And there is our female versus male caller. So let's add a title to that. I'm going to add a title up top and change the words to the right colors for that gender so that we can kind of quickly tell which area of the chart corresponds to what gender. This way we don't need that legend anymore, and it tells us the story correctly. All right, so that is working, and as you can see, when I click on the slicer, this doesn't change. So this is presenting the overall picture. Now here we want to see the rating information for the currently selected rep. So again, we'll need one more pivot. I'm gonna copy this pivot, paste it here, and in this pivot, I'm gonna take out the city and the gender, and we have got the calls, and we'll go here and select the rating rounded and put it into rows so that we can see the call count. Let's select any cell here, go to pivot table analyze and give it a name. This is pivot table 8. I'm going to name this as rep satisfaction, and come here, right click on the slicer, go to report connections and link it to the rep satisfaction as well. So now this is going to show me the number of calls that rep has received and how satisfied are the customers. And here, let's just add this as a column chart and cut this and put it right here. Let's adjust the size of this. We'll need the title and this one here. I'm going to set the gap width to 10% and let's fill it with this color. And let's just set the title as rating. And there is our rating information. Again, you can select a different representative and you'll see this graph updates nicely based on who you select. One problem with this is if a representative, for example, R05 here, you can see that they don't have any calls that have 1 rating or 0 rating. So they'll have only 4 columns here. Whereas a different representative like R02, they'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the number of columns here keeps changing depending on who you pick. And this might be a little bit annoying if you present it to an audience. So how are you going to fix it? I'm going to leave that to you as a homework. Figure it out and leave a comment on how you would solve this problem. And now that brings us to the last part of the report. Here we want to see what is happening at each customer level for each rep. So we have got 15 customers. They're scattered across 3 cities. You can see this in the data here. These are the 15 customers and they are scattered in these 3 cities. I want to see for each city, each customer, for all of our 5 reps, how the revenue breakdown looks like. And for whatever rep that I'm currently interested in, so right now R05, I want to highlight that combination as well so that we can see how that is for that particular person. So let's go ahead. This is going to be another pivot table and we can kind of copy this pivot and paste it here. And in this pivot, let's just take out the rating and go to customer and first add city and then the customer ID underneath that. I'm going to take out the call count and introduce the representative as well as total amount. Now the problem with this pivot, because we copy pasted, it is only showing me R05. Whereas what I want is, I don't want to just see R05. I want to see all the representatives R1, R2, R3, R4, R5, but highlight R05. So first we need to delink the slicer from this pivot. How are we going to do that? You can do it in 2 ways. You can go to the report, right click, report connections and uncheck the new pivot that we just added. Another option is you can also select any cell in the pivot table, go to the analyze ribbon, and here you'll see that there is a filter connections button. So if you tap on that, it will tell you what slicers are connected to this pivot, and I can uncheck the representative slicer so it's not paying attention to that. At this point, you'll need to clear the filter from representative column so that it shows everything. So whichever way you do it, make sure that you delink it. So now that this is delinked, I'm going to rename this pivot. It's pivot table 9. I'm going to call this as rep amounts. And let's take out this particular grand total row. We don't mind grand total column. So I'm going to go to the design ribbon, grand totals, and just say on for rows only, so that there is only this column and that row is gone. Next up, we'll just take all of this information, put it into the dashboard, and from there we are going to adjust all the things. So I'll select all of this. This kind of makes an assumption that there is only ever going to be 15 customers scattered across these 3 cities. If you were to end up with more customers than this, then this approach doesn't work. But for now, this is all right. So I'll copy this, Control C, come here, select this cell. We're going to need a few more cells up top for the titles. Let's go here and right click and link the values, paste as link. So whatever that is there, it kind of comes up here as a linked value. We have got lots of zeros here, which is what happens because in the pivot up top, we have got blank value. So that's why it's coming up as 0. This is a bit annoying. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this out, and instead what I'll say is if open bracket and then go to the pivot, grab this entire thing. So then we'll say if this is equal to empty space, then I want empty spaces, not zeros. Else I want the same range. And this way those blank ones will come in here as blanks, and this looks all right to me. What I'll also do is I'll make sure this first column is a little bit wide enough to print the cities correctly, and I'll just adjust some of these things. Okay, so that looks good. And here we'll just say equal to and go to the pivot and get these 5. And the last one I'm just going to manually say total. And then for these individual customers, I'm going to select them using control and indent them a little bit inside and select all of these, reduce the font size by 1 point and select these things, control 1, and apply currency formatting with the 0 decimals. Okay, so that looks good. The next thing that I want to do is I want to add conditional formatting data bars here so we can see how big these numbers are. So I'll select all of these values. You can just select the whole thing and go to conditional formatting data bar and apply a solid bar. The problem with the data bars is while they do tell the volume of the numbers, they also kind of overwrite the value. So sometimes it makes it hard for us to read. So we're gonna follow another trick here. We'll select this again and go to conditional formatting manage rules, select the data bar, double click on it. And instead of going from automatic to automatic, I'm gonna just set the minimum to number 0 and maximum to a formula. So the formula is, and here I'm gonna say max of open bracket, select all these numbers times 2. So whatever is the maximum, I want the maximum value of this bars to be twice as much. What this does is, it's kind of tricky to explain, but once you see the result, it makes sense. So I'll wait for that. And then I'm going to change the color to a dark color like that. So now you can see that whatever is the maximum value, I think the maximum is 2280. And whoever has that value, so here is the guy, that bar will only be half as wide as the entire cell width. So this means everything else kind of gets scaled down and we can get a sense of how big the numbers are, but we can also read them if we need it. This looks perfect. The only additional thing that we need is whoever is the rep that we are currently interested in. So for example, R05, I want to highlight that entire column. This is really simple. I'm gonna select this entire range, including the headers, and go to conditional formatting and add another rule. And this time we're going to use a formula based rule, and the formula is we simply want to check if the value in this row, so Q19, and it says $Q $19, if you press F4 once, it will become Q $19. So that's what we want to use. So whatever is in the row number 19, but relevant column, so QRSTU like that, is equal to, and go to the pivots and point to this cell here. This is the one that tells me which representative we have selected. So if that is equal to that, then I want to apply a formatting which is of this color. And I also want to add border around it. The border will be a little bit darker color on both sides. So for R05, that's going to be highlighted. If I select R03, that will be highlighted. R01, 2. If I multi-select, it's always going to just highlight the very first one. So if I go from 2 to 4, it's just going to highlight the 2. That's not a problem. And this is done. Now I can select this entire range and I can press Ctrl 1 to open the formats and go to border, and I'm going to add a border around it, and I'm going to fill this up with white color. What this does is it kind of creates this boxy look here, and it sets that apart from our background there. I notice that some alignment is happening, misalignment, so you can see this is aligned there. I'm going to move this up there. I think that'll do. And this bit here, I'm going to reset the color to that. There we go. That looks beautiful and everything works nicely. I'm going to select this row, make it bold. I'm going to select these cities and make them bold as well. Let's test this out. If I select a different representative, I can see that representative's information highlighted, filtered, all of these graphs update, and this conditional formatting also working beautifully. The only bit remaining is bringing in the picture of the representative and showing some quick summary about them. We'll need to go to Assets tab for this. In the Assets tab, I have got for each representative their picture. Like I mentioned earlier, I made these pictures from the stock images. So I'll quickly show you how one picture is made so that if you want to kind of zazz it up a bit and add customer images or something, you know how to do it. This is really simple. You want to go to Insert, click on Pictures and place over the cells and select Stock Image. From here, go to Cutout People and you'll get lots of people images that are doing weird poses with their faces and hands, kind of like YouTube thumbnails really. And you can select whatever you want. For example, you think, okay, this person would be perfect fit for a customer. I can select that and insert that, and you'll get a high quality picture of that person. Now this is a full picture of them standing. We don't need that level. I just want their face and kind of see that much alone. So I'm going to go to picture format, crop, aspect ratio 1:1. So this will give you a square crop, and right now it is cropping just her body. What I'll do is I'll move this around until we see the face, and you can kind of make the picture big so that you just get the shoulder and head, kind of like a passport picture. Once this is done, you can select this picture again, go to picture format, crop to shape, and this time select an oval shape, and that will give you a circle crop around their whole thing. As it is 1:1, we'll get a perfect circle crop, and this is the picture that I'm using. Once the picture is ready, you want to select is place the picture in a cell. Again, if you hold down the Alt key, it kind of snaps, and once it is there, if you see in Excel 365, you'll have this option to place the picture in a cell. So if you tap on that, that picture is now belonging to the cell. So I3 cell has the picture. So wherever else, if I want to use the picture, if I go here and equal to, and then say assets I3, I'm going to get that picture. So this is the basic approach that we are using. Let's set up rest of it here. So here we know what representative it is. We're going to create an area in the pivots for rep summary. And what we want to see is, again, I'll flash the completed report here. We want to see the picture, percentage of calls they have taken, what is their rank in the number of calls, as well as total amount. One being the highest rank or highest amount or highest calls. So for example, R05 has the third rank, so they're halfway there. Percentage of calls, this is easy. We just say, what is the, you can see that there's two pivots here. What is this number as a percentage of that number? So I can select this, divide that with that, and we'll get that as 0.186, and you can apply percentage formatting, so you'll see that as 19%. Call rank and amount rank, these are a little bit tricky, but essentially what we want to know is what is the total number of calls R04 took and what was their rank as against all of the people. So for this, first we need to know what is the total number of calls they took, and then we can calculate the rank. So here I'm just going to move these a little bit down, and first let's calculate the calls and amount. The calls for this representative R04 would be, this is really simple, we can just say XLOOKUP R04 in the representative column here, and get the number of calls. Likewise, we will do one more XLOOKUP R04 in this and get the amount. Then we can just ask what is the rank. We can use rank.avg of that number in all the calls. What is the rank of that amount in these amounts? So for that representative R04, you can see that they are 5th ranked in calls and 5th ranked in the amounts because they are the lowest calls and lowest amount. You can see that here in the data as well. This all works fine until you select multiple items. So I'm going to select 3. And you can see that even though when I selected 3, I'm getting some sort of a rank here. So this shouldn't really be the case. So we'll need to have a fail-safe mechanism kind of a thing. We'll deal with that later further down, but the numbers are there. And now we can generate the labels. The first one is percentage of calls. And this is basically percentage of calls ampersand that number. I was thinking it's going to say percentage of calls 61%, but it was actually showing me the decimal value of that. So we'll need to use the text function around this value with 0% as the format code. What that does is it takes that number and applies the format code and converts the whole thing into a text representation. So you can kind of stitch them together to make a sentence like this. Likewise, call rank ampersand this one, amount rank ampersand. So these will always show even when you have multi-selected. What we want is we don't want to see these two things if I multi-select. So here I can kind of write an if condition if, and then I can check count A of these 5 cells is greater than 1. That means you have picked more than one value. Then I don't want anything else. So that way this thing is kind of prevents the call rank from showing. We'll use the same logic for amount rank as well. So the information is coming. What about the image? Image is easy. We'll say image, and we're going to fetch the image of the person that is currently active. So again, for the image, we'll say XLOOKUP, look up this person and go to the assets and select the representative names. And once the lookup has done its job and found the person, we want their image. So we're going to select these values. So whoever is the first value in R01, their image will come up. If we multi-select, then it will show the first one. But if you select just one person, R04, it will be R04 and we'll get their image here. Again, we don't want the image if you multi-selected. So we can apply the same if logic. If the count is more than 1, then we don't want anything else, do the XLOOKUP. So this way the image will come, but if you multi-select, there won't be any image, it's just blank. All right, so everything is now ready. Let's get the image here. For the image, I'm gonna select all of these cells and merge them. So we have got enough space to show a big image. And then here I'll say equal to and point to the image cell and hit enter. So that image will come up, and here underneath we'll say equal to percentage of calls equal to call rank equal to amount rank. And I'm going to select these 3 and I'll say merge across. So each row will be merged, and we can center align that, tone down the color and reduce the size a little bit. And you can test this. If I select somebody, I'll see their picture as well with additional details and insights that might help me understand how we are doing at a call center. That kind of concludes the construction part of our portfolio project. How do you like this? I'm really impressed by how far we have come in this free data analyst course and how we are able to create such a gorgeous, beautiful and insightful dashboard out of the call center data. Let's add a cherry on the top by bringing in a title here. This is really easy. You can just make the row number 1 big enough for that and type the call center report 2023 as the title. Adjust the alignment and make it big. That kind of adds the detail on the top. If you want, you can add more insights and titles to kind of illustrate or explain the information that is being shown here. But for now, I am very happy with what we have achieved. And everything is dynamic. If you have got new data, let's say you have got data for 2024 calls, you can just add this at the bottom and set this up for everything. Once the data is added, you can just come here and go to the data ribbon and refresh all the pivots and calculations will be updated and everything will nicely fall in place. As a challenge, I recommend you try out replacing some of these visuals with your own ways of looking and understanding the data. That way you get to think like a data analyst and see what else can be presented or what else can be explained from the data. Give it a try and let me know how that goes in the comments below. I want to sincerely thank you for taking time to learn Excel with me through this free data analyst course. I hope you have found all the information that you need to master Excel and be a confident data analyst. But if you think you need more help with Excel, either hand-holding and explanation of more detailed features or repetition of some of the core fundamentals in different examples, I recommend checking out my Excel School program. I have been running a variation of this program since 2010, and in the last 14 years, I have helped more than 12,000 people online with this course. It is a tremendous program designed with all my experience of working and helping others as a data analyst. So naturally, in this course, you won't find boring and useless information like what each button will do or what are the numerous shortcuts of Excel do. Instead, I focus on how to take a data analysis situation and how to solve it using various features of Excel. I put a link to this course in the video description below. Please check it out and sign up. The course goes much more deeper than the free data analyst program's Excel module and introduces you to a lot of advanced concepts and how to work with them, how to combine them to get the outputs that you need. There is also an optional module on Excel dashboards that helps you create amazing looking dashboards like this from your data. Check out the course using the video description link and sign up today to take your Excel skills to the next level. Thank you so much once again for taking part of this Excel module of the free data analyst course. Bye.